You've been tricked into believing that peace comes from fixing everything, your past, your future, your body, your mind. That once you finally figure it all out, the anxiety will disappear. But if that were true, why do people who do everything right still feel tight in their chest, stuck in their head, and exhausted by their own thoughts? Why does sleep feel more like a battle than a refuge? The truth is, anxiety doesn't come from the world outside. It grows from the stories the mind keeps telling, the ones about what might happen, what should have happened, and what never seems to stop happening. But Buddhism offers something most advice doesn't: a way to let go, not by fixing the storm, but by stepping out of it. This isn't about becoming a monk or escaping your life. It's about finally learning how to stop running from your thoughts, your fears, and your endless need to control what can't be controlled. It's about melting the tension, not by force, but by understanding. The kind of understanding that comes when the noise dies down and the truth gets a chance to speak. Tonight, while your eyes rest and your body sinks into stillness, these teachings will begin to undo the knot inside your chest. Thought by thought, breath by breath, the grip will loosen, the panic will soften, and a quiet confidence will begin to rise, a deep knowing that you don't have to chase peace anymore. You already have it. You just forgot how to feel it. This isn't just another sleep audio. This is the night everything changes. Are you ready? Let's begin. But before we go any further, let's go deeper. Because the problem isn't just anxiety. The real problem is why it's there. And more often than not, it's hiding beneath one dangerous habit almost no one questions: the obsession with knowing. The belief that safety comes from having all the answers. The constant pressure to be sure, to predict, to plan, to control. It sounds logical, but it's the very thing that keeps the mind locked in fear. This is where it begins to unravel. There's a silent kind of suffering that grows from needing certainty. It doesn't scream. It whispers through racing thoughts at 3 a.m., the kind that ask, "What if?" over and over until the body tenses and the breath shortens. The need to know what's next, to have a solid plan, to avoid any surprises. It doesn't create peace, it steals it. And Buddhism doesn't try to feed that need. It dissolves it. Because true calm doesn't come from answering every question. It comes from realizing that most of those questions never needed answers in the first place. The wisdom of not knowing isn't ignorance. It's a radical, grounded freedom. It's the moment you stop running through every possible outcome, stop trying to solve the future like a puzzle, and realize the only safe place has always been right here. Not in the next plan, not in the next explanation. Right here, right now. And Buddhism teaches this not as an abstract idea, but as a lived, embodied practice. Letting go of certainty isn't some spiritual poetry. It's the key to inner stillness. We've been taught that to feel safe, we need to predict. But prediction is just a guess dressed up as control. The truth? Life has never been under anyone's full control. Not yesterday, not now, not tomorrow. The weather shifts, people change, plans fall apart. Even the most carefully built lives are still touched by the unknown. And here's the twist. The more someone tries to control that chaos, the more anxious they become. Because deep down, the body knows it's a losing game. Buddhist wisdom turns that entire game upside down. It says, stop trying to win, stop needing to know, stop fighting the river and learn to float. Not knowing becomes power when it's embraced, not feared. When it's understood not as a flaw, but as the nature of all things. Impermanence isn't a threat, it's a relief. Because if everything changes, then even anxiety isn't permanent. Even fear isn't forever. There's nothing to cling to, and in that space, the mind finds air. Instead of chasing fixed answers, Buddhism teaches how to sit in the presence of the question, to feel the discomfort of uncertainty and not react. That space between not knowing and reacting is where real transformation happens. It's the space where anxiety starts to melt, not because it was solved, but because it was seen with new eyes. Think about how often certainty is used like armor. If I just know what they're thinking, if I just know how it ends, if I just know what to do. But every layer of that armor is heavy, and it never really protects. It just makes it harder to breathe. Letting go of that need doesn't make someone vulnerable. It makes them light. It makes them free. Zen teachers sometimes say, "Don't know mind is closest to truth." That phrase isn't a metaphor. It's a direct invitation to step out of the trap of constant labeling and judging and predicting. It's the exact opposite of what the anxious mind does. Anxiety tries to categorize every experience, label every emotion, forecast every outcome, and in doing so, it squeezes the life out of the present moment. But what happens when the mind softens, when it stops demanding answers? Something surprising takes its place, not confusion, not chaos, but clarity, a quiet, grounded awareness that doesn't need a name or a plan. This isn't giving up. This is waking up. One of the most powerful tools Buddhism offers is curiosity. Not the kind that needs facts, but the kind that gently asks, "What is this?" without rushing to define it. When anxiety arises, instead of trying to get rid of it or explain it, the practice is to meet it, see it, feel it, let it be without trying to fix it. Because in that gentle meeting, something shifts. The anxious energy loses its grip. The need to label fades, and awareness takes its place. This is why so many Buddhist practices begin with the breath. Because the breath doesn't need to be understood, it only needs to be felt. The breath is never in the future. It's always now. And every time attention returns to it, the mind drops a little bit of its obsession with knowing. A breath can't be predicted. It can only be received. That's the training, moment by moment, breath by breath, learning to receive what is instead of chasing what might be. What's extraordinary is how fast the nervous system responds to this. The body listens. When the mind no longer screams for control, the shoulders drop, the heartbeat slows, the stomach unclenches. Because finally, the inner command center has stopped yelling instructions, and in the silence, the body returns to its natural rhythm, a rhythm that was always waiting underneath the noise. The practice of not knowing is also about humility. It admits what most of us try to hide, that we are not in control, that we don't have all the answers, that life is bigger than our plans. But instead of resisting that fact, Buddhism bows to it. And in that bowing, there's power, there's release, The kind of release that feels like finally putting down a burden no one asked you to carry in the first place. Some of the greatest breakthroughs come from this surrender, not because a plan was made, but because the mind was quiet enough to hear something deeper. Intuition doesn't scream, wisdom doesn't argue. They wait for silence, they wait for space, and the obsession with knowing leaves no room for either. That's why Buddhist teachings are so full of paradox, because the truth doesn't fit neatly into answers. It lives in tension, in presence, in stillness. When the anxious mind hears that, it gets frustrated. It wants clarity, it wants resolution, but the deeper self hears something else. It hears peace, because peace isn't the absence of problems, it's the absence of needing to control them all. This shift is subtle but profound. It's the moment the inner voice says, "I don't know," and that's okay. It's not helpless, it's spacious, it's not giving up, it's giving in to the flow of life instead of the illusion of control. And slowly, that acceptance becomes strength. The kind that doesn't flinch when life swerves. The kind that smiles at change instead of fearing it. Even in meditation, this principle is key. Beginners often think they need to stop thoughts, but the truth is, there's no need to stop anything, just to notice, to stay with what is. That's the practice of not knowing, not trying to shape experience into something else, but allowing it to unfold. Over time, the mind learns that it doesn't need to be the director of everything. It can simply be a witness, a participant, a friend to the present moment. This isn't just spiritual poetry, it's neurological reality. When the mind stops over-analyzing, new parts of the brain light up. Areas connected to creativity, insight, and calm become more active. The nervous system resets. The immune system strengthens, sleep improves, the body begins to repair, all from the simple act of no longer needing to know. The great Zen master Shunryu Suzuki said, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few." Anxiety wants to be the expert. It wants to narrow the future into one safe path. But peace lives in the opposite direction, in the openness of a beginner's mind, a mind that sees the world fresh, without categories, without assumptions, a mind that doesn't need the future to be known to feel safe now. This shift isn't just personal, it changes how one relates to others. When the mind no longer needs to predict or judge, conversations become deeper, relationships become lighter. There's less pressure to fix or advise or explain, just presence, just listening. And in that space, connection grows. The wisdom of not knowing is not passivity, it's engagement without tension. It's the quiet confidence that whatever comes can be met. It's the rooted strength of someone who no longer needs life to follow their script. Because they've stopped writing scripts, they're too busy living. Letting go of certainty doesn't mean life becomes vague or meaningless. It means life becomes vivid, felt, real. Every sound, every touch, every breath becomes a doorway back to presence. And in presence, anxiety loses its fuel, because anxiety can only survive in the imagined future, never here. So the next time that wave of worry rises, pause. Don't fight it, don't follow it, just see it. Know that it doesn't need to be solved. It just needs space, Give it that space. Give it permission to rise and fall, and know that in doing so, you're practicing the greatest form of courage, living without needing to know. And as the body softens, and the thoughts slow down, and the breath deepens, a different kind of knowing begins to emerge. Not the kind built on facts and forecasts, but the kind that's felt in the bones. The kind that says, I am okay, right here, right now. That's the wisdom of not knowing, and that's where peace begins. The moment certainty loosens its grip, something strange and subtle begins to show itself. A strange quiet, a hollow feeling, as if the mind suddenly asks, if I don't have to know everything, then who am I? That's not a flaw in the path. That is the path. When control fades, the self, the one who was clinging so hard, begins to flicker, and in that flickering, the next truth unfolds. The anxiety that once clung to the future also clings to identity, to the labels, the image, the role, the mask. Beneath anxiety often lives the fragile idea of me. And Buddhism goes deeper, not just to the fear of not knowing, but to the fear of not being something solid at all. There's a tension that lives quietly in the way people carry their own identity, a weight that comes from trying to always be someone who's strong, someone who's capable, someone who's healed, someone who's never anxious. These expectations build up like walls, trapping a person inside their own idea of themselves. It creates pressure to keep up the performance, to match the image. And when reality doesn't cooperate, when mistakes happen, when fear shows up, when life gets messy, anxiety flares, not just because of the event, but because of the threat it poses to that inner identity. Buddhism doesn't tell people to strengthen that identity. It gently suggests that the identity itself is the cause of tension, not because people shouldn't have a personality or story, but because believing that those things define them is what makes life feel like a constant test. There's a reason the Buddha taught anatta, the absence of fixed self. Because when the self becomes flexible, pressure disappears. When the mind no longer has to defend an image, peace becomes possible. Most people don't realize how deeply they're protecting their identity. It's not always loud or obvious. It's in the hesitation before saying, I don't know. It's in the way someone over-explains to prove they're smart enough. It's in the way someone avoids vulnerability to appear strong. These behaviors don't come from arrogance. They come from fear. Fear that if the image cracks, they'll be rejected, abandoned, unworthy. But what if that fear is built on a false foundation? What if the image was never needed in the first place? When someone starts to observe their own identity instead of living inside it, something shifts. The anxiety that came from always needing to measure up begins to lose power. The shame that came from failing to be a certain version of oneself begins to lift, because there's nothing to defend anymore, nothing to hide, just a stream of experience moving through awareness. Thoughts come, emotions pass, roles change, and none of them need to be clung to. There's a deep misunderstanding that identity equals meaning, that without a fixed sense of self, life becomes empty. But that's only true when identity is seen as the source of worth. Buddhism points towards something else, that identity is a tool, not a truth, a useful fiction that helps navigate the world, but not something that needs to be worshipped. And when that fiction is seen clearly, it stops being a prison. The anxiety of identity also shows up in comparison. If someone believes they are their job, then someone else doing better feels like a threat. If someone believes they are their reputation, then criticism feels like destruction. But if identity is soft, if it's understood as temporary, then there's nothing to protect. There's room to grow, to fail, to laugh, to evolve. And with that space comes calm. Meditation helps reveal this directly, not through ideas, but through experience. Sitting in stillness, the mind begins to watch its own patterns. It sees the way it tries to hold on. I am this. I should be that. I must not be that. But with time and practice, those statements lose their grip. They become like clouds, brief, shifting, insubstantial. And slowly, identity starts to feel more like weather than architecture, not something permanent, just passing formations. What rises in the absence of fixed identity isn't emptiness in the way most people fear. It's not hollow, it's spacious, light, freeing, like walking into a room with all the windows open. There's a Buddhist phrase, emptiness is form, and form is emptiness. It sounds confusing, but it's pointing to something simple. That the very things people cling to, thoughts, roles, emotions, are only real when they're held lightly. And when they're seen clearly, their empty nature reveals something new. Presence, aliveness, a kind of quiet joy that doesn't come from being anything in particular, just from being. The ego wants to make everything solid. It wants definitions, rules, status. But the truth is more like a river, always flowing, never fixed. And when people stop trying to freeze that river into a shape called me, they stop fighting reality. They stop being at war with who they think they should be. And that silence, that surrender, is where anxiety begins to disappear. There's also a beauty in not having to always be consistent. Identity demands consistency, but life isn't consistent. Some days someone feels strong, other days they fall apart. Some moments bring wisdom, others bring confusion. If a person believes they must always be one thing, they will suffer when they're not. But if they see the self as fluid, there's no punishment in changing. There's only movement. Even in relationships, this matters. Fixed identity creates conflict. You're supposed to be this kind of person. I thought I knew who you were. These expectations come from forgetting the truth of impermanence. When self is seen as a process instead of a product, compassion grows. There's less judgment, more room for surprise, less need to label, and more willingness to witness. The fear of losing identity is often tied to meaninglessness. But Buddhism shows that meaning doesn't vanish with ego, it expands. Without the pressure of being a certain someone, there's more space to connect, to serve, to love. Not because it proves anything, but because it feels natural. Because the heart no longer needs validation, it just wants to give. And underneath all of this is one deep truth. Peace doesn't come from being somebody. It comes from not needing to be anybody. That doesn't mean giving up goals or passions. It means doing them without turning them into a measurement of worth. It means showing up to life as an open hand, not a clenched fist. In the end, the calm that comes from emptiness is not blankness. It's clarity. The kind that can laugh at its own seriousness. The kind that doesn't panic when plans fall apart. The kind that can hold sadness without collapse and joy without addiction. Because there's no self to protect, just presence to return to. As thoughts drift, as the body begins to slow, let this understanding settle deep. The self is not a cage, it's a doorway, one that leads back to stillness every time you stop trying to define it. And in that stillness, anxiety dissolves, not because anything was fixed, but because the pressure to be fixed was finally released. When the weight of identity finally loosens, there's a moment of lightness. But right behind that space, something else tends to rise. Quieter, sneakier, harder to detect. A part of the mind that doesn't shout or cling, but watches, evaluates, judges. It's not trying to be cruel. It believes it's helping. It thinks it's keeping things together. But in truth, this constant internal monitoring, the observer that never stops watching, is one of the deepest roots of anxiety. And until that observer is seen clearly and gently released, peace will always feel just out of reach. There's a pressure that most people carry without even realizing it. It's the pressure of being watched by themselves. It's not just what others might think. It's the inner narrator that watches how you speak, how you move, how you feel, and instantly compares it to how you should be. It tracks your every word, questions your emotions, and whispers doubts the moment anything feels uncertain. This mental self-observer is not just exhausting, it's anxiety dressed in intelligence. It builds up over time, from school systems that reward performance over presence, from families that equate behavior with worth, from cultures that tell people to be polished, impressive, and mistake-free. Slowly, the mind learns to split. One part lives, the other part watches. And the more that second part grows, the more pressure builds. Because now, it's not just about being, it's about being seen, even when no one is around. That's the prison, being followed everywhere by your own commentary. Buddhism approaches this not by trying to destroy the inner observer, but by seeing it for what it is. A pattern, a habit, a survival tool that stayed long after it was needed. When mindfulness is misunderstood, it can even feed this pattern. People here watch your thoughts and turn it into a performance. They try to meditate perfectly. They try to feel the right way. Even their silence becomes self-conscious. And suddenly, even spiritual practice becomes part of the inner checklist. But true mindfulness isn't more self-monitoring. It's less. It's noticing without analyzing, witnessing without correcting. It's not turning life into a test, but seeing it as unfolding experience. This difference is subtle, but it changes everything. Because when the inner observer softens, the nervous system begins to rest. The muscles unclench. The breath deepens. The constant background noise starts to fade. The habit of self-monitoring often hides behind perfectionism, a belief that if everything is controlled, anxiety will stop. But perfectionism is just fear wearing a mask. The fear of being wrong, the fear of being rejected, the fear of being seen as inadequate. And the observer tries to prevent that by catching every mistake before anyone else can. But in doing so, it replaces real life with constant mental rehearsal. This is why some people feel anxious even when nothing is wrong. because their inner environment is full of tiny threats. Did I say that right? Was that the right decision? What will they think? It's like being in a job interview all day long, even at home, and that tension doesn't leave the body just because the room is quiet. It leaves when the inner voice stops narrating everything like it's a courtroom transcript. One of the most effective practices in Buddhism to soften the inner observer is the use of open awareness. Instead of laser focus on one object, the mind is allowed to rest in a spacious noticing. Sounds come and go, thoughts pass like clouds, sensations arise and fade. There's no commentary, just experience, no labeling, just presence. And over time, the part of the mind that always checks begins to relax, because it realizes that it's not needed, that life doesn't need to be micromanaged to be lived well. There's also the practice of radical permission, allowing whatever is present to be exactly as it is, not because it's ideal, but because fighting it only feeds anxiety. When sadness shows up, let it stay. When awkwardness comes, let it be seen. When thoughts race, let them run without chasing them. This is how the inner observer loses fuel, because it feeds on resistance, on trying to fix, control, or perfect every moment. People often think letting go of the observer will lead to recklessness or loss of standards, but the opposite is true. Without constant self-monitoring, actions come from a deeper place, from intuition, from authenticity. The voice isn't rehearsed, it's real. The smile isn't measured, it's sincere. The presence isn't staged, it's true. This shift doesn't happen overnight, but it begins the moment the inner observer is seen clearly. Not as an enemy, but as an outdated habit, one that may have once served a purpose, but now only holds back peace. Gently, patiently, with kindness, that habit can be unlearned. Not through more rules or more performance, but through trust. Trust in the body, trust in the heart, trust that life knows how to live itself, even without constant supervision. There's also something important to know. The inner observer often speaks in the voice of anxiety. It predicts failure before anything even begins. It turns neutral moments into danger signals. It constantly asks, "What if this goes wrong?" And in doing so, it creates tension where none existed. But when that voice is met with awareness instead of belief, it begins to lose power. It becomes background noise, not a command center. Sometimes, the way forward is to stop fighting that voice and start noticing its patterns. There it is again. That's the part of me that panics before every new thing. That's the voice that learned fear a long time ago. And just like that, a gap opens up. A space between the voice and the listener, and in that space, freedom begins to grow. Compassion is also essential here, because self-monitoring often comes with self-criticism, harshness, guilt, a running list of shoulds. But Buddhism teaches that compassion isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. Without it, the mind becomes a battlefield. With it, the mind becomes a refuge. Speaking to yourself kindly, even when things go wrong, isn't indulgent. It's medicine. It's how the nervous system learns that safety doesn't require perfection. The inner observer doesn't need to be silenced. It just needs to be seen, softened, and eventually released. When it relaxes, life becomes less like a performance and more like a dance. Movements flow, emotions shift naturally, even mistakes become part of the rhythm, and instead of bracing for judgment, the body moves with ease. Anxiety thrives on anticipation, and the inner observer is always anticipating what will happen, what they'll say, how you'll respond. But real life doesn't need that much preparation. It needs presence. It needs breath. It needs truth. The observer lives in the future, but peace lives here, right here. In the moment you stop watching yourself and start being yourself. Every moment of release counts. Every breath where the commentary goes quiet is a doorway, and with practice, those doorways become wider. The observer becomes quieter, and what remains is presence, calm, wholeness, the natural peace that was always underneath the noise. So, as the mind rests and the body softens further, let this truth take root. You are not the voice that watches. You are the space it appears in, and that space is already free, already enough, already at peace. Once the inner observer starts to fade, the silence it leaves behind can be beautiful, but it also uncovers something deeper, something more primal. Beneath the self-monitoring and overthinking, there's a pull, a tug-of-war the mind plays with the world. It reaches for what it wants. It runs from what it fears. That constant swing between craving and aversion is the hidden rhythm that drives most anxiety. It's subtle, but it shapes every choice, every mood, every thought. Buddhism calls this cycle samsara's pendulum. And unless this swinging is seen clearly and softened, the mind will keep spinning in panic, even when life is quiet. Craving doesn't always look like desire. Sometimes it shows up as restlessness, as a hunger for relief, for certainty, for something to fix the unease. The anxious mind clings to fantasies of success, of safety, of being liked, believing that once those things are secured, peace will follow. But it never does, because the craving itself creates pressure, and every time the mind says, "I need this to feel okay," it also says, "Without it, I'm not okay." That dependency becomes a prison, a loop, a constant chase that never really ends. On the other side of the pendulum is aversion, the pushing away of discomfort, awkwardness, fear, and pain. This is the part of anxiety that makes the body tighten. That tells you to avoid the meeting, skip the phone call, suppress the feeling. It's not just about discomfort, it's the belief that discomfort must be removed immediately, that anything unpleasant is dangerous. And that belief feeds panic, because now it's not just pain, it's panic about pain. Together, craving and aversion form a loop. The mind chases one thing, flees from another, and calls that running life. But it's not life. It's reactivity. It's an endless back and forth that never allows rest. And because neither craving nor aversion can ever be fully satisfied, anxiety becomes the background hum of existence, a low-level alarm that never really turns off. Buddhist practice interrupts this loop, not by replacing craving with discipline or suppressing aversion with force, but by cultivating something else entirely: equanimity. The calm strength to meet both attraction and fear without being pulled. Equanimity isn't numbness, it's not indifference, it's clarity. It's the grounded, centered awareness that sees a thought arise and doesn't chase it. That feels a fear appear and doesn't flinch. That knows both the pleasure and the pain are temporary and doesn't build an identity around either one. Anxiety is often strongest when equanimity is weakest. When someone can't sit with the tension of "not yet," the craving takes over. When someone can't bear the discomfort of emotion, the avoidance grows louder. But equanimity teaches a different way: to stay, to soften, to allow, not as a strategy to escape, but as a way to dissolve the need for escape entirely. The pendulum isn't bad, it's natural. Pleasure comes and it feels good. Pain comes and it doesn't. But when the mind becomes attached to chasing one and rejecting the other, peace is impossible. It's not the experience that hurts, it's the grasping, it's the pushing, it's the refusal to be with what is. Craving says, "This isn't enough." Aversion says, "This is too much." Equanimity says, "This is what's here." And in that shift, the cycle begins to slow. There's also a hidden fear behind craving, the fear of emptiness. That if we stop wanting, we'll lose direction. But Buddhism shows that true clarity doesn't come from grasping. It comes from seeing. When the need to fix and change everything pauses, space opens, and in that space, life reveals itself. Not as something to conquer, but something to meet, moment by moment. Even small things reveal the pendulum, craving the perfect response to a text, dreading a silent pause in a conversation, wanting to be praised, fearing being misunderstood. The mind is constantly pulling and pushing, but with practice, it learns to stay steady, to feel the swing but not be thrown by it. This is not passive, it's deeply alive, fully awake, because nothing is being numbed or avoided. Everything is being met. Meditation helps retrain the nervous system in this. When cravings arise, to move, to get up, to check your phone, you stay. When aversions arise, boredom, discomfort, restlessness, you stay. Not out of force, but out of choice. And each time you stay, the mind learns that not every urge needs to be answered. That safety doesn't require control. That peace can be present even when comfort is not. This is why Buddhism teaches non-attachment, not detachment. Detachment is pushing away. Non-attachment is letting things be without needing to hold on. It's the difference between rejecting the world and being free within it. And this freedom is what stops the pendulum, not by freezing it, but by stepping off the ride entirely. Some of the most common anxieties, fear of failure, fear of judgment, fear of loss, are rooted in the pendulum. Wanting to succeed, wanting to be liked, wanting to feel safe, and fearing the opposite. But when the craving dissolves, so does the fear, because there's no longer something that must be achieved or avoided for the self to be okay. There's also a misunderstanding that equanimity will make life dull, but the opposite is true. When you're no longer constantly reacting, you can actually see. The sky is clearer, the moment is sharper. Emotions are deeper, but lighter. Joy isn't a high, it's a still, quiet warmth. Sadness isn't a pit, it's just a passing wave. There's no longer a need to hold or fix, just to feel and move and return. In daily life, equanimity looks like patience during chaos, like silence in the face of pressure, like kindness when it's not easy. It doesn't mean feeling nothing. It means not being owned by what you feel. It means being able to experience without clinging, to love without needing, to hurt without collapsing. This doesn't happen through theory. It happens through training, moment by moment, breath by breath, choosing to pause instead of react, to notice the craving rising and not feed it, to notice the aversion flaring and not obey it. That pause is sacred. It's where the pendulum starts to slow, and over time, something profound begins to happen. The energy once wasted on chasing and resisting becomes available. The mind becomes clearer. The heart becomes more open. The body softens. Not because life is perfect, but because the fight is over. And in the absence of that fight, anxiety has nowhere to land. The pendulum still moves, but it no longer pulls. Cravings still come, but they don't command. Aversions still appear, but they don't control. The mind sees them, thanks them, and lets them pass, like wind through an open window. There's a deep, quiet power in not reacting. It's not weakness, it's wisdom. It's knowing that not every discomfort is a problem, that not every urge is worth following, that sometimes the greatest strength is found in staying still while everything moves around you. And now, as the next breath flows in and out, feel the space that's opened, not because the world changed, but because the grip on it softened. This is how anxiety ends, not with a bang, but with a breath, with the gentle unraveling of the need to chase and the need to run. As the swing between craving and aversion begins to slow, something unexpected is revealed. Even after the thoughts settle, even after the need to chase or run fades, a residue remains. It doesn't speak in words. It doesn't even form clear thoughts. It lives in the chest, in the shoulders, in the breath. It tightens the jaw without permission. It shortens the inhale before danger appears. It curls the body inward without any conscious choice. This is the echo of old experiences, the body's memory of fear. And until that memory is met and gently released, anxiety will always have a place to hide, even in silence. Many people believe their anxiety lives only in the mind. But the body tells a different story. A story of old moments still being replayed under the surface. Times when it wasn't safe to relax. Moments when the body had to armor itself to survive. These reactions become embedded, not because the person is broken, but because the nervous system learned something it never got the chance to unlearn. Over time, this conditioning becomes so familiar, it stops being noticed. But the tightness is still there. The shallow breath, the clenching, the racing pulse, and it all whispers the same message: something is wrong. But what if nothing is wrong anymore? What if the moment of danger has passed, but the body hasn't realized it yet? This is where Buddhist insight meets somatic healing. Because Buddhism doesn't stop at calming the mind, it goes all the way into the body, into the breath, into the places where emotion hides in silence. And one of the most powerful tools for releasing that hidden anxiety is body scanning meditation. Body scanning is not about fixing posture or relaxing muscles by force. It's about presence, awareness, noticing without judgment, meeting the body exactly as it is and letting it speak in its own way. The process is simple, but what it reveals is profound. moving attention slowly through each part of the body, not to change it, but to feel it, to sense what it's holding, to let awareness melt into every corner the mind usually ignores. This kind of attention is not mechanical. It's soft, gentle. It doesn't analyze or explain. It just feels. And in that feeling, tension starts to release. Not because it was commanded to, but because it was finally heard. The body doesn't need to be pushed. It needs to be seen. And when awareness meets sensation with patience, the nervous system learns it's safe to let go. Trauma doesn't always come from dramatic events. It can come from years of small moments where someone felt unseen, unsafe, or unprotected. These moments accumulate, and the body stores them like layers of armor. Shoulders lift to guard against criticism. The belly tightens to brace against uncertainty. The throat constricts to hold back words that were never allowed. And over time, these patterns become chronic, normal, invisible. But they're not permanent. They're only waiting to be felt. Buddhism doesn't treat the body as separate from the mind. It sees them as one expression of awareness. So, healing must include both. Thoughts may calm with meditation, but until the body is included, the work is unfinished. That's why Buddhist practice often includes mindful movement, walking meditation, and posture awareness, not as exercises, but as doorways. Every step, every breath, every sensation is a chance to reconnect, to feel what's been forgotten. Releasing stored anxiety in the body is not about perfection. It's not about reaching a state of complete relaxation and staying there. It's about relationship, meeting the body like an old friend who's been carrying too much for too long, asking it, without force, what are you holding? What can be let go now? What has already passed? Sometimes the most healing thing is to feel discomfort fully, not to solve it, not to numb it, just to stay present with it. This presence teaches the body that it no longer needs to be in defense mode, that it doesn't have to contract to be safe, that rest is not a weakness, but a birthright. The breath is one of the most powerful tools in this work, not by controlling it, but by feeling it, letting it guide the scan, noticing where it flows easily and where it gets caught. These stuck places are not problems, they're messages. The body doesn't lie. It remembers what the mind has forgotten. But with each breath that moves deeper, each exhale that softens resistance, that memory begins to shift. The story begins to change. Equanimity, explored earlier, becomes even more important here. Because sometimes what arises during a body scan is uncomfortable. Tightness, heat, sadness, a trembling. But equanimity allows it to be there without panic, without labeling it as wrong. This non-reactive awareness is what allows true healing, not suppressing, not fixing, just staying, just being with. Over time, this builds trust. The body starts to trust awareness. It starts to feel safe in presence. And when that trust grows, the old patterns begin to unravel on their own. The shoulders drop, the belly softens, the breath deepens, and all without force. Because healing is not about control, it's about safety. And safety is born through kindness. Kindness toward the body is radical, especially in a culture that teaches control, discipline, and appearance over inner reality. But Buddhism invites a different approach, one that values stillness over performance, one that bows to sensation rather than trying to dominate it. This bowing is not submission, it's wisdom. It says, I trust the intelligence of this body, and that trust dissolves fear. Some people wonder why anxiety lingers even after therapy, medication, or mindset shifts. Often, it's because the body wasn't included in the healing. The tension stayed, the breath stayed shallow, the nervous system stayed in high alert, and no amount of thinking can undo what the body hasn't released. That's why this work matters, because peace is not just a mental state. It's physical, it's cellular, it's breath-based. It lives in the posture, the pace, the silence. There is no right way to do this. Some people scan from head to toe. Others start with the hands, the feet, the belly. It doesn't matter where you begin. What matters is that you begin, that you feel, that you pause long enough to let the body speak. And when it speaks, you don't interrupt. You listen, you stay, you breathe. This practice also builds resilience. The more often you meet discomfort without running, the more your system learns to stay regulated. You become less reactive, less tense in the face of uncertainty, more open to the full range of experience. And anxiety begins to fade, not because you fought it, but because you no longer feared it. There will be days when tension returns, when the body tightens for no clear reason. That's not failure, that's memory. And memory doesn't need to be erased to be released. It needs to be held, like a child, gently, with patience, with care. The great teachers of Buddhism knew this, that real freedom doesn't live in grand ideas. It lives in the small moments when you feel your feet on the ground, your breath in your belly, your heart beating in your chest. And you know, without thinking, that you are safe right now. And that's what this is about. Not escaping, not transcending, but returning again and again to the body, to the breath, to the place where anxiety begins and ends. So, let the next breath come with ease. Let the body soften. Not because it was ordered to, but because it's finally allowed. This is how peace grows. This is how panic fades. Not by force, but by presence. As the body begins to release the weight it's held for years, something new is uncovered. A softer, quieter current that runs beneath muscle, beneath thought, beneath posture. It isn't sharp like trauma. It doesn't feel like a wave. It feels like a loop, tight, circular, repetitive. It's not the original fear. It's the reaction to the fear. The moment anxiety shows up and the mind says, "Oh no, not this again." It's fear of fear, and it's one of the most invisible, exhausting patterns in the anxious mind. The pain is not just in the anxiety itself, it's in the resistance to it. That second response, the second dart, is what turns a simple discomfort into full-blown panic. But it doesn't have to be this way. Not when you see what's happening with clarity and meet it with compassion instead of judgment. In Buddhist psychology, there's a powerful teaching about the two darts. The first dart is pain. The second dart is our reaction to it. The first is unavoidable. It's part of being alive. The body gets sick. The heart gets hurt. The mind gets confused. But the second dart, that one is optional. It's the mind's habit of doubling down. Why is this happening? This shouldn't be here. What's wrong with me? That's where suffering multiplies. That's where anxiety turns from a passing storm into a constant inner war. The fear of fear shows up in so many subtle ways. It's the tightening when a small worry appears, followed by the rush of trying to make it go away. It's the frustration when calm doesn't arrive fast enough. It's the shame that bubbles up after a panic attack, as if the emotion itself was a failure. But none of that is about the original fear. It's all second dart. It's the story layered on top of the sensation, and it's that story that keeps the nervous system stuck in alarm. Breaking this cycle begins with recognition, seeing the second dart for what it is, not the enemy, but a learned reaction, a habit the mind picked up to try to stay safe. Most people were never taught how to be with fear. They were taught to avoid it, suppress it, or distract from it. So, when it arises, the mind scrambles. It looks for a fix. It labels the fear as a threat, and the body responds as if danger just increased, when in reality, nothing new happened. The panic came from the reaction, not the original feeling. Mindful witnessing is the first step toward unraveling this. It means pausing when anxiety arises and noticing not just the fear, but the response to the fear. The thoughts, the urgency, the tension. And instead of believing them, you just see them. You don't try to change the feeling, you change your relationship with it. You become the one who watches, not the one who fights. And in that shift, the energy starts to move differently. The spiral begins to break. Compassion is essential here. Because the second dart often comes with self-blame, a quiet voice that says, "You should be over this by now. Why can't you just relax?" But those thoughts only feed the fear. They add more weight, more pressure. And healing never comes from pressure. It comes from space, from warmth, from the kind of inner kindness that says, "It's okay that you're scared. You're allowed to feel this." That simple permission begins to undo the panic. The mind fears fear because it believes it will last forever. That once anxiety starts, it won't stop. That it will take over, ruin everything, spin out of control. But that belief isn't true. It's just unexamined. When you sit with fear without adding resistance, you discover something surprising. Fear rises, peaks, and fades, just like every other emotion. It doesn't need to be fixed, it just needs to be allowed. And the more often you allow it, the less power it has. This is why meditation is such a powerful teacher. Because in stillness, fear is easier to see. And when it arises, you don't run. You stay. You breathe. You watch. And slowly, the second dart loses its edge. The thought, "This is bad," is replaced with, "This is here." The panic shifts into presence, and presence doesn't panic. There's a physical layer to this too. Fear of fear tightens the breath, it narrows the eyes, it hunches the shoulders. But when you notice that and soften, the body sends a different signal to the brain. We're not in danger. The nervous system begins to calm, not because you forced it to, but because you stopped feeding the fire. You let the flames burn out naturally. Over time, this becomes a new habit. The first dart may still come, an old memory, a racing thought, a flicker of panic, but the second dart doesn't follow. Or if it does, it fades quickly. And suddenly, you're not afraid of fear anymore. You don't need to run from it. You don't even need to fix it. You just know how to meet it, and that knowing is power. This kind of healing isn't flashy. It doesn't look dramatic. It happens in the quiet moments, in the space between the thought and the reaction, in the breath between tension and surrender. And each time you choose awareness over resistance, compassion over criticism, you rewire the mind. You teach it that fear is not the enemy, it's just another visitor. And like every visitor, it leaves when it's no longer entertained. There's also a shift in language that helps, moving from "I am anxious" to "anxiety is here." That small change creates space. It separates the feeling from your identity. You are not your fear. You are not your panic. You are the awareness that holds all of it. And that awareness is unshaken. This is what Buddhism points to again and again, the nature of mind as a spacious field. Emotions arise within it, but they are not it. They pass through like weather, and fear, when met with equanimity, has nowhere to land. It becomes just another part of the landscape, not a storm, just wind. It's important to say this clearly. Fear of fear is not weakness. It's conditioning. It's what happens when people are never taught how to sit with their own discomfort. But you are learning now. You're building the capacity to meet fear with something stronger than resistance. You're learning to meet it with presence. And presence doesn't ask questions like, "Why is this happening?" It asks, "Can I stay? Can I feel this? Can I soften right here?" And even if the answer is no at first, the asking itself is a door, a new path, a shift away from panic and toward peace. Fear will still visit, but it won't stay as long. It won't speak as loudly. It won't run the show, because now it's being met by someone new, someone calmer, kinder, and more awake. So let the next breath be full. Let it move through your chest without needing to change it. Let fear be here if it needs to be. And know that it's not a failure. It's just a flicker of human experience passing through an infinite sky. When fear no longer triggers fear, and the second dart begins to dissolve in awareness, the mind finds stillness. But there's something deeper that still stirs beneath the surface. A quiet hum that never really goes silent. It's the sense that something is always coming, that something must always be prepared for, a future that hasn't arrived but already feels urgent. This invisible pressure doesn't always scream. Sometimes it feels like restlessness, like impatience, like an unease that can't be placed. And it all comes from one place: time. Not time as it truly is, but time as the mind imagines it. Linear, rushing, urgent. That version of time feeds anxiety. But there's another way to experience time, a way that doesn't chase the future, a way that heals. Buddhism doesn't treat time as a straight line. It treats it as a construct of thought, something the mind uses to organize the world, but not something real in the way presence is real. Most of the stress people carry doesn't come from this moment. It comes from what they think this moment will lead to, from the imagined consequences of what's not yet happened. And that future thinking pulls attention out of the body, out of awareness, into a mental world that never settles. Meditation cuts through this illusion by bringing attention back to what doesn't move, this breath, this sensation, this stillness. Clock time is useful, but it's not always helpful. There's a difference. It helps organize schedules, plan tasks, meet others. But when clock time becomes the lens through which the inner world is measured, peace becomes impossible. Because no matter how present someone tries to be, the mind keeps asking, what's next? It keeps measuring, judging, counting, and in that counting, life is missed. Anticipatory stress is a direct byproduct of linear time perception. The idea that something in the future could go wrong, that one must be ready, that now is only useful if it's building toward later. But the truth is, now is already complete. It doesn't need to prove itself by becoming something else. Meditation teaches the body and mind to rest in that, to feel the fullness of a moment that doesn't lead anywhere. That simply is. There's a moment in deep meditation when the usual sense of time fades. The body is still, the mind is quiet, and the question, how long have I been here, disappears. Not because the clock stopped, but because attention is no longer trapped in the idea of minutes and hours. This is what non-linear time feels like, not an abstract theory, but a felt experience, a sense of timelessness. Not infinite time, but freedom from needing time to do anything. This state doesn't require years of retreat. It begins in small moments, pauses, gaps in thought, the silence between words, the stillness between breaths. These are the entry points, and the more the mind learns to notice them, the less grip the future has. Because what feels so urgent is often not the event itself, but the projection around it. What if becomes a loop that never resolves. But when time stops mattering, the loop has nowhere to go. It unravels. Non-linear perception also frees people from the need to rush. Anxiety thrives on speed, on urgency, on the belief that one is always behind. But Buddhist teachings don't rush, they unfold. Like breath, like nature, like seasons. Each moment opens into the next without force, without needing to get somewhere. And in that pace, peace grows. One of the most powerful realizations is that the future does not exist in any real sense. It's always imagined, always a construction. And when that construction is seen through, what remains is now. This now may be uncomfortable or joyful or neutral, but it's real, it's touchable. And that reality is grounding. It breaks the fantasy of future disaster. It allows the nervous system to reset. The practice of non-linear time also rewires how people relate to productivity. So much anxiety is tied to the feeling of falling behind, of not doing enough. But when presence becomes the focus, the obsession with outcomes fades. Tasks are done with attention, not tension. Conversations happen with care, not calculation. The moment becomes the goal, not just the path to a goal. There's also healing in letting go of deadlines inside the heart. Emotional healing doesn't follow a clock. Growth doesn't follow a calendar, and trying to force them to move faster only creates more stress. Buddhist wisdom invites a deeper trust that what needs to unfold will in its own time. That awareness is not late, that the body knows its rhythm. Time also becomes distorted during anxiety. A single minute of panic can feel like an hour. A peaceful hour can pass in what feels like seconds. This shows how subjective time really is. The mind controls the experience of time, not the clock. So when the mind settles, time becomes soft, spacious. And when time is spacious, anxiety has no tight corners to press against. Letting go of clock time doesn't mean ignoring responsibilities. It means no longer measuring life's worth by how fast things are achieved. It means recognizing that presence is not a delay, it's the destination. That joy doesn't live in the future, it lives in awareness, right here, right now. There are also practical ways to step out of linear time. Mindful walking without tracking steps or distance. Eating slowly without looking at the clock. Turning off notifications that divide attention into fragments. Creating moments each day with no goal except to be. These are not luxuries. They are medicine for a mind addicted to motion. In monastic life, this way of living is embedded into everything. Bells ring, not to announce tasks, but to return people to now. Meals are eaten in silence so that eating becomes meditation. Chores are done with full attention, not as obstacles to the next thing. This isn't just tradition, it's training. Training the mind to leave time behind, not forever, but often enough to remember what freedom feels like. And in modern life, that same training is still possible. It begins with one breath, not timed, not counted, just felt, fully, and then another, and then another. Each one dissolving the illusion that something else must happen, that something else will complete you, nothing else is coming, and that's not a threat, it's a gift. The more the mind returns to presence, the more life reveals its depth. A single moment contains more than 1,000 plans, the sound of wind, the rhythm of a heartbeat, the softness in someone's eyes. None of these are found in the future. They're found in this open, untimed moment. And when the mind lands here, anxiety has no hook, because there's nothing missing, nothing to chase, nothing to lose. This is what it means to leave clock time, not as escape, but as arrival. Arriving fully into this breath, this body, this now. And the more deeply you arrive, the more deeply you heal. Because the future cannot be healed. Only now can. Let the breath move without schedule. Let the day unfold without prediction. Let time become soft, like mist, like space, like the sky. This is where panic ends, not in fixing the future, but in forgetting to fear it. Because there is no later. There is only this. As time softens and the future loses its grip, the mind begins to rest in something closer to its natural state. But even within presence, thoughts still arise. Subtle judgments, tiny plans, memories drifting in without warning. The stream of thinking doesn't stop just because the clock disappears. And this is where the next layer of insight emerges. Beneath thought, beneath reaction, beneath even awareness of the present moment, there is something more subtle still. A space so quiet, so still, it exists before thought even begins. Not in the past, not in time, but in pure awareness, untouched by identity, untouched by worry. Buddhism calls this the breath before breath, and when the mind touches this space, anxiety no longer has anywhere to grow. This state is not abstract. It is not spiritual poetry. It is something deeply real and surprisingly accessible. Everyone has felt it at least once. Those moments where the world fades just before falling asleep, when there's no effort to think, no urge to move, no voice narrating anything. Just pure presence, without content. The reason this state matters is because it's the only place the anxious loop can't follow. because the loop needs thought to survive. It needs commentary. But in pre-thinking awareness, the mind doesn't latch on. It just rests. The key to entering this state begins with breath. Not the controlled breath of technique or discipline, but the raw breath that happens before it's noticed. Most people only connect with their breathing once it becomes shallow or tense. They catch themselves after the disturbance. But the invitation here is to connect with the breath so early, so subtly, that thought hasn't even arrived. The inhale that hasn't yet been labeled. The exhale that hasn't yet been managed. That's the doorway. To access this, the mind must slow down, not with force, but with permission. You don't grab at the breath. You don't guide it. You simply meet it, gently, like catching a feather in freefall. Attention shifts from thought to sensation, but even that shift is soft. There's no inner voice saying, "Now I am focusing." That would be too late. The practice begins before that voice, before the observer forms. It's awareness of awareness itself. This may sound impossible, but it's closer than you think. All it requires is a kind of listening that doesn't wait for words, a sensing that doesn't need shapes. Most meditation techniques guide people into this slowly. Watching the breath, noticing sensations, naming thoughts. These are steps that prepare the system. But this practice skips even the preparation. It starts from stillness. And in that stillness, you notice something surprising. There is no need to do anything. Awareness is already here. The breath is already happening. The only thing missing was noticing it without naming it. This is what interrupts anxiety at its very root. Because anxiety always begins with a story, a projection, a resistance. But in pre-thinking awareness, there are no stories, no projections, just openness. Thoughts may still come, but they don't catch. They float by, they dissolve. And slowly, the habit of following them fades. It's like watching ripples fade on a lake. You don't need to push them down. You simply stop throwing stones. That's what the breath before breath teaches. That the mind doesn't need to be controlled. It just needs to be left alone. And in that allowing, peace emerges not as a goal, but as the natural state of being. This space also reveals something powerful about identity, because before thought, there is no self, no role, no past, no problem to solve, just presence. And when someone lives from that presence, even for a few moments, everything shifts. Decisions become simpler, emotions become less sticky, relationships become less reactive, because the inner anchor no longer depends on control. It depends on connection, connection to what is always already here. In daily life, this awareness can be accessed in micro moments. Just before speaking, just before reacting, just before checking your phone. These are the spaces where anxiety usually enters, when attention slips forward into prediction. But if instead awareness drops backward into the breath, into the sensation of simply existing, the loop is interrupted. Not violently, not with effort, just softly, like a curtain opening to reveal light. One way to practice this is to sit in silence with no goal, no breath count, no mantra, just a simple intention to notice the first breath, not the second, not the 10th. The first one, the one that rises before the mind catches it. You won't always find it, But the act of looking shifts something. It rewires the nervous system away from problem solving and into presence. It trains attention to live before the storm. This practice also shifts how you relate to time. Because before thought, there is no urgency, no clock, no future, and in that timeless space, the body heals, the breath regulates, the heart rate slows, the immune system recalibrates, all from doing nothing, not passive nothingness, but alive stillness, the kind of stillness that listens with its whole being. Over time, this becomes less of a practice and more of a home. A place the mind naturally returns to when panic arises, not to escape, but to remember that you are not the anxious thought. You are the space it appeared in, and that space cannot be harmed. What's powerful is that this doesn't require special conditions. You don't need a meditation cushion. You don't need silence. You don't even need to close your eyes. You just need a breath. One breath that is felt, not manipulated. One breath that arrives before thinking begins. And from that breath, everything else slows down. There's also a sense of intimacy that comes with this. You are meeting yourself before the mask, before the role, before the nervousness. You are meeting the you that existed before anxiety had a name, before fear became a habit. This meeting is not dramatic, it's quiet, but it changes everything. Because once you know that this space exists, you are never fully caught again. Even in the middle of chaos, you remember. There's something behind this, something deeper than the noise. In Buddhist language, this is sometimes called original mind or beginner's mind. But labels don't matter. What matters is the experience. That soft landing in awareness that asks nothing and gives everything. The freedom of not needing to improve or analyze or defend. Just to be. And that being becomes the foundation, the new default. So when thoughts rush in, they are met with space. When fear starts to climb, it is met with stillness. Not resistance, just awareness that is rooted in something older than fear, something more trustworthy than thought. This doesn't mean you won't feel anxiety again. It means you'll see it for what it is, a movement, not a message, a ripple, not a truth, and that seeing sets you free. Let the next breath rise and fall, not because you made it happen, but because it always does. That rhythm is ancient. That awareness is yours. You don't need to do anything. You are already resting in the space before thought, the breath before breath. And in that space, everything is calm. Even after touching the space before thought, after finding the breath untouched by words, something still pulls. The moment the world returns, sounds, voices, alerts, sudden movements, the body tenses again, the mind wakes up, and the old habit kicks in. Reaction, the need to respond, to answer, to fix, to judge, to plan. The moment presence is interrupted, the reflex to respond comes rushing back. But what if that habit could be let go of too? What if peace isn't just found before thought, but also in the decision to no longer respond to everything that follows? There is a hidden anxiety in constant response. Most people feel responsible for every sound they hear, every message they receive, every feeling that rises inside them. It doesn't feel like a choice. It feels automatic. Someone speaks, and the mind prepares a reply. A phone buzzes and the hand reaches for it. A thought arises and attention follows. But the truth is, not everything requires a response. Not every sound is a call, not every feeling is a command. When the need to react to everything dissolves, space opens, and in that space, real calm begins. The nervous system is shaped by how often it is pulled. Each time the mind rushes to react, it confirms the belief that something outside or inside must be handled right now. This creates a cycle of urgency. The body tightens, the heart speeds up, the breath becomes shallow. Even when nothing is wrong, the inner state mimics an emergency. The result is chronic mental fatigue, a deep exhaustion from constantly managing stimuli, not just physical, but emotional and psychological too. Buddhism teaches renunciation, not as punishment or sacrifice, but as clarity. To renounce something doesn't mean to hate it. It means to recognize that it no longer serves, that it adds weight instead of freedom. And one of the most powerful things someone can renounce is the need to react. The belief that attention must always lead to engagement. That awareness must be followed by action. This belief isn't natural. It's trained, but it can be untrained. And in its place comes silence. Silence is not the absence of sound. It's the absence of compulsion. The space where something is heard or felt and no response is needed. This kind of silence is internal. It doesn't depend on the environment. It lives in the gap between stimulus and reaction. And the more often someone rests there, the more stable their peace becomes. Meditation is the training ground for this. You hear a sound and you let it pass. You feel an itch and you don't move. A thought appears and you watch it leave. Over and over, the mind learns. This too can pass. This too does not require me. This isn't numbness. It's mastery. It's the ability to choose when and how to engage instead of being pulled automatically. In daily life, this becomes even more powerful. Not reacting to every opinion, not answering every emotional tug, not rushing to fill every silence. This doesn't mean being cold or distant. It means being centered. Knowing when response is needed and when stillness is wiser. This discernment is what breaks the loop of mental overload. So much anxiety is rooted in over-engagement, always being on, always absorbing, always adjusting. But the truth is, not everything belongs to you. Not every thought is yours to fix. Not every conversation is yours to complete. Not every discomfort is yours to soothe. When that truth settles in, the mind exhales, the shoulders drop, and presence deepens. There's also a false sense of identity tied to reaction. Many people believe they are their reactions, their quickness, their helpfulness, their opinions. So letting go of reaction feels like disappearing, like not existing. But Buddhism teaches that identity built on reaction is unstable because it depends on circumstances, on conflict, on activity. True self is deeper. It's found not in how you respond, but in who you are when you don't need to respond. And this reveals another insight, that you don't owe every moment a response. You don't have to pick up every phone ringing in your mind. Some thoughts can be left unanswered. Some feelings can fade without being solved. Some problems don't need you to carry them. This is the wisdom of non-engagement. Not as avoidance, but as clarity. Letting go of the response reflex also restores energy. Each unneeded response is a leak. And when that leak is sealed, the body feels lighter. The mind feels sharper. Creativity returns. Joy returns. Not because you added anything, but because you stopped giving energy to what doesn't matter. This is especially important in a world filled with noise. Social media, news, constant updates. The modern mind is flooded with stimulation, and every piece of it says the same thing: react to me. But not reacting is power. Scrolling past without judgment, hearing without replying, witnessing without absorbing. These are not passive acts. They are acts of strength. Stillness also allows for true response when it's actually needed, because when you're not reacting to everything, you can respond more clearly to what really matters. You have space, you have energy, you have clarity, and that clarity leads to wiser action, not just more action. One way to practice this is to create deliberate pauses. Before speaking, before checking something, before solving. Just one breath. One moment where you ask, does this need me? Often the answer is no. Often what you thought needed response dissolves when left alone. There's also a shift in responsibility. Many people carry the hidden belief that they must fix everything they notice, that noticing equals obligation. But this is a trap. Noticing does not require fixing. Awareness is enough. And when the mind learns that, it stops turning everything into a task. Renunciation of reaction also reveals peace as a background state. When you stop reacting, what's left is not emptiness, it's contentment, a quiet joy, a soft strength. Because the mind isn't being pulled, the emotions aren't being stirred, you are not spinning, you are resting in your own center. This practice doesn't require perfection. There will still be moments when you react out of habit. That's okay. Each time you notice it, you're already halfway back to presence. The point is not to never respond, but to choose your responses wisely, to stop letting the world decide how you feel and act, to reclaim your own rhythm. Renunciation also brings with it a deep kind of freedom. Not reacting means you are no longer bound to the behavior of others. You are no longer a puppet pulled by emotions, events, or expectations. You are rooted, not in resistance, but in stillness. And that stillness makes space for real insight, real compassion, and real peace. Let the world turn, let the thoughts rise, let the feelings pass. You are not required to attend to all of it. You are not the manager of the universe. You are a witness, and in witnessing without reacting, you dissolve the chaos. This is the peace that doesn't fade, the kind that stays even when life is loud, the kind that doesn't depend on silence outside, because it's rooted in silence within. You found it not by striving, but by not answering every knock at the door. Once the habit of reaction begins to fall away, a deeper truth reveals itself. Underneath the reflex to respond to every sound, thought, and feeling lives something even more persistent. The belief that peace only comes when life goes a certain way. That calm is earned through control, not the obvious kind of control, the loud dominance or perfectionism, but the quiet, daily effort to manage everything. The subtle tightening of plans, the mental rehearsing of conversations, the way attention scans constantly for what might go wrong. It all comes from the same root, a deep fear that without control, things will fall apart. But what if the need for control is the very thing causing the suffering? Control promises safety. It says, if you prepare enough, you won't be surprised. It whispers, if you manage everything well, you won't feel pain. This seems logical. The mind believes it, and so it tries harder, schedules more, plans every detail, corrects every mistake, fixes every feeling. But control is a contract with no satisfaction clause. It never feels complete. Because the future can't be controlled. People can't be managed like machines. Emotions don't move on command. And when life doesn't follow the script, the anxiety deepens. Not just because things didn't go as planned, but because the plan was mistaken for safety. Buddhism sees this clearly. It teaches that control is a form of grasping, a tightness around life itself. And wherever there's grasping, there's suffering. Not because life is cruel, but because resistance to its flow always creates tension. The more control someone tries to impose, the more disconnected they become from reality. Life isn't a puzzle to be solved. It's a movement to be joined, a rhythm to dance with. And that dance begins when control ends. There's a difference between clarity and control. Clarity sees things as they are. It flows with change, adapts, listens. Control resists what is, demands what should be, and fears change. Clarity brings peace. Control brings pressure. And this pressure shows up in the body. The jaw clenches. The hands stay busy. The chest feels tight. The breath becomes shallow. All signs that the mind is trying to grip what it can never fully hold. The illusion of control is also tied to identity. Many people believe they are only as good as their ability to manage outcomes, to stay calm, to be productive, to meet expectations. But that identity is fragile. It breaks when plans fall apart. It crumbles under the weight of unexpected emotion. And so the anxiety grows, not from the event itself, but from the fear of no longer being who you thought you had to be. Letting go of control doesn't mean letting go of responsibility. It means releasing the illusion that everything depends on you. It means doing your part fully and then stepping back. Trusting the process. Trusting that not everything needs your constant supervision. Control says, it's all on me. Clarity says, I'll show up and let life move as it needs to. The mind resists this at first. It wants certainty. It wants insurance against the unknown. But the unknown is not the enemy. It's the space where life lives. Every joy, every discovery, every moment of peace you didn't plan, all came from the unknown. Control would have skipped them, but surrender receives them, not passively, but with full presence. One practice that helps loosen the grip of control is inquiry, gently asking, what am I trying to manage right now? What would happen if I let this be? Is this mine to carry? These questions don't dismiss responsibility. They reveal where control is being confused with care. You can care deeply and still let go. You can act with intention and still release the outcome. Another practice is softening the body. Control lives in tension, so releasing it starts with the muscles. Relax the shoulders, soften the belly, let the hands rest. These physical shifts send signals to the brain. It's okay to let go. It's safe to not know. This doesn't mean danger is gone. It means your relationship to uncertainty has changed. You're no longer bracing against it. You're breathing through it. This also applies to thoughts. The need to control often shows up as overthinking, running scenarios, replaying conversations, predicting every outcome. But these thoughts don't create safety. They create noise. And the more the mind tries to prepare for every possibility, the less it can enjoy the one that's actually here. Letting go doesn't mean stopping thought. It means not following it, letting it rise and fall like waves while you remain grounded in the present. In relationships, control often hides behind care. The need to make sure others are okay. The urge to prevent them from feeling pain. But real connection doesn't come from control. It comes from presence. From being with someone exactly as they are without trying to change their experience. This kind of love doesn't bind, it frees. There's a deep strength in releasing control. Not the strength of force, but the strength of trust. Trust in life. Trust in yourself. Trust in something larger than the plan. This trust isn't blind. It's grounded in experience. Every time you let go and peace arises, the mind learns, I don't have to hold everything, I can rest. This rest is what heals the nervous system. Constant control keeps it in high alert, always scanning, always bracing. But surrender tells the body, the fight is over. You are safe now. You can soften. And in that softening, healing begins. This is not about giving up. It's about giving over. Letting life meet you instead of always chasing it. Letting moments arrive instead of trying to create them. Letting emotions move instead of trying to manage them. This openness is where presence deepens, and in presence, peace becomes natural, not forced, not earned, just remembered. There's also a spiritual layer to this. Many Buddhist teachings point to the idea that the self is not in control because the self is not fixed. Who you are is a process, not a product. A stream of experience, not a static identity. And the more you try to control that stream, the more suffering arises. Letting go means joining the stream, trusting its direction, trusting that even when it twists, even when it rushes, it's carrying you somewhere meaningful. Letting go doesn't remove fear. It removes the resistance to fear. It doesn't erase discomfort. It removes the need to change it. And in that allowing fear and discomfort begin to soften on their own, because they are no longer being fed. Even control over healing must be released. The mind says, I need to fix this now. But healing has its own pace, its own rhythm. When you stop trying to accelerate it, it begins to unfold naturally, like a flower that blooms when it's ready, not when it's told. This shift changes everything. The way you breathe, the way you walk, the way you sit in silence, no longer chasing, no longer resisting, just being, fully, here, now. Let the breath rise, let it fall, let the world turn without your grip. The less you hold it, the more it holds you. This is the secret, the paradox. That surrender is not weakness, it is the beginning of real strength. After letting go of control, there's a quiet shift. A different kind of awareness begins to take shape. Less focused on fixing, more tuned into understanding. No longer fighting the waves of anxiety, but now curious about where they come from. Not just the surface triggers, but the deeper layers, the unseen causes that build up until panic feels automatic. Buddhism offers a way to trace that journey, a way to see how a single moment, a tiny spark, turns into a flood. This map is called dependent origination. It's not just philosophy. It's a step-by-step explanation of how suffering begins, and more importantly, how it ends. Dependent origination describes 12 links, 12 movements, each one naturally leading to the next. It begins so subtly that most people don't notice it. That's why anxiety often feels like it comes out of nowhere. But with practice, you start to see the pattern. You start to notice the chain. And once you see the chain, you can stop pulling it. You don't need to break it with force. You just need to stop following it. The first link is ignorance. Not ignorance as in being unintelligent, but as in forgetting the truth of the present moment. It's the moment when awareness dims, when attention leaves what's real and drifts into habit, assumption, or belief. This sets the entire chain into motion, because once awareness is lost, reaction takes over. Ignorance leads to mental formations. These are the conditioned reactions based on past experience. The thought patterns, emotional habits, and unconscious responses that play out when presence is lost. They shape perception before perception even happens. If the nervous system has been trained for fear, these formations will reflect that. They set the tone for what comes next. Next comes consciousness. Not general awareness, but a specific kind of awareness tied to these formations. It filters experience through old lenses. Everything now is colored by the past. This consciousness is narrow. It looks for what it expects to find. If fear was planted early, fear is now more likely to be seen. Following consciousness comes name and form, the building blocks of identity and the physical body. This is where experience starts to become personal. The mind begins to say, "This is me," and "This is happening to me." A sense of separation takes shape. The world feels solid, fixed. Experience stops being just sensation and starts being a story. That sense of self gives rise to the 6 sense bases: the eyes, ears, nose, tongue, body, and mind. These aren't just physical organs, but the entire system of receiving information. With these in place, the world floods in. Sensory input becomes constant. Every sight, sound, and thought has a doorway. From the senses arises contact, the meeting point between the sense organ, the object, and the awareness of it. It's the moment when experience is felt directly, the warmth of a touch, the sharpness of a word, the volume of a sound. Nothing is good or bad yet, it's just raw data. But this is where things begin to turn. Contact leads to feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. This is the first spark of reaction, the moment something feels nice or not, the moment the body leans in or flinches away. It's still simple here, just a response. But if awareness isn't steady, this spark turns quickly into fire. The next link is craving. When something feels good, the mind wants more. When something feels bad, it wants it gone. Craving is not just desire, it's the compulsion to change the moment. It's the refusal to stay with what is. This is where the anxiety begins to grow, because now peace depends on getting or avoiding something, and that tension makes the present feel incomplete. Craving turns into clinging, not just wanting, but holding on, building identity around what is wanted. I need this. I must avoid that. This feeling means something about me. Clinging makes the moment personal. It creates pressure. The stakes get higher. Everything becomes a test, and the nervous system reacts. Clinging leads to becoming. The identity now hardens. The self feels defined by what it wants, what it fears, what it avoids. This is not just personality, it's the emotional atmosphere. The body contracts, the thoughts repeat. The future is imagined as something that must be shaped. Becoming is the momentum that carries anxiety forward, even when nothing is happening. Becoming leads to birth, not physical birth, but the birth of a specific self in the moment, the anxious self, the overwhelmed self, the one who feels the panic, the one who believes the thoughts. This birth feels real. It feels like me. And because it feels so real, it becomes the lens through which everything is seen. Finally, birth leads to aging and death. Again, not physical death, but the death of peace, the decay of presence. The cycle completes in suffering, in grief, in fear, in all the painful emotions that come when a moment becomes a threat and the self feels fragile. But here's the power of this teaching. Any link can be stopped. You don't need to go all the way through. You can notice the craving and pause. You can feel the contact and stay. You can witness the feeling without needing to react. The map shows not just the trap, but the exit. To use this in real time, practice noticing the moment a feeling arises. Don't label it as good or bad, just feel it. Then notice if craving follows. If the mind starts to say, "I want more of this," or "I can't stand this," pause there, stay there, let the craving dissolve without feeding it. Each time you do, the next link loses strength. The chain weakens. This is not easy at first. The chain moves fast, but with mindfulness, it slows. You begin to catch the formation before it hardens. You see the thought before it becomes a belief. You feel the reaction before it becomes identity. And with that awareness, you choose differently. Meditation helps make this possible, not by blocking thoughts, but by slowing them enough to see the sequence, to notice when ignorance arises and bring in clarity, to feel craving and offer compassion, to sit with discomfort without turning it into fear. Over time, this becomes a new habit, a gentle watching instead of a quick reaction. This practice is not about getting rid of the links, it's about seeing them clearly. When you see the pattern, it stops being automatic. You are no longer caught in it, you are watching it move. And in that watching, freedom is born. The mind will still form, feelings will still arise, but they don't have to turn into suffering. They can appear and pass like clouds. They don't have to become a self. They don't have to become a prison. They can just be. Let the next feeling come. Let it move through the body. Don't chase it. Don't avoid it. Just notice the link. Where does it want to go? What if you didn't follow it? What if this moment could stay open? This is how the cycle ends, not with a dramatic breakthrough, but with a gentle refusal to keep walking the same path. A choice made over and over, to see clearly, to stay soft, to stop pulling the chain. Once the links of dependent origination are seen clearly, the mind becomes sharper. Not in a tense way, but in a way that sees the trap before stepping in. There's less automatic reaction, less blind following of mental patterns. But even so, thoughts still arise, worries still form. Sometimes the spiral starts before awareness catches it. And that's when something else becomes essential. Not just insight, but interruption. Not in a forceful way, but like a gentle hand on the shoulder reminding you to return. In Buddhism, this is called the bell of mindfulness. A sound, a breath, a feeling that brings you back to now, back to the body, back to presence. These moments don't erase anxiety, they interrupt its momentum, and sometimes that's all it takes to stop the spiral from growing. Awareness anchors are simple. They are not tools that require effort. They are points of return, touchstones. Something that exists in the present moment that can pull attention away from the storm of thinking. It could be the sound of a bird outside, the weight of your feet on the floor, the rising of the belly with a breath. These things don't shout, they don't demand. But when you learn to notice them, they become lifelines. The problem with anxious thoughts isn't just their content, it's their rhythm. They move fast. One thought triggers another, then another, and within seconds, you're imagining worst-case scenarios, future disasters, things that haven't happened and may never happen. The thoughts build on each other because there's nothing breaking the chain. The momentum grows because there's nothing interrupting it. But a single moment of attention can stop it cold, not by solving the thought, but by stepping out of the loop entirely. The bell of returning isn't always a sound. Sometimes it's the texture of your clothing, the temperature of the air, the pause between words. It's anything real, immediate, and felt. These anchors ground the mind. They remind it that there is a body, that there is breath, that this moment exists, and it's not the one the thoughts are describing. The present is usually far less dramatic than the future the mind is racing toward. And that contrast wakes something up. There's a practice in Zen monasteries where a literal bell is rung at various points in the day. When it sounds, everyone stops. Whatever they're doing, whatever they're thinking, they pause, breathe, return. It's not a break from life, it's a return to it. The bell isn't the distraction, the thinking is. The bell is the reminder that you've wandered and that you can come back. You can create your own version of this. It might be a phone chime set to ring every few hours. It might be a word you whisper when your mind starts to spin. It might be placing your hand over your heart and feeling its warmth. The technique doesn't matter. What matters is that it's real, that it breaks the trance of thought, that it says to your system, we're back, we're here, we're safe. When this becomes a habit, everything changes. Anxiety doesn't disappear overnight, but its power fades, because now there's another voice in the room, one that doesn't argue or resist, one that simply points to now. That voice doesn't need to be loud, it just needs to be consistent. You don't need to win the argument with the anxious thoughts. You just need to stop attending their meeting. This is not about distraction. Distraction is avoidance. Awareness anchors are engagement. They engage with reality instead of illusion. Distraction says, don't think about that. Awareness says, come see what's actually happening. It's not suppression, it's redirection, away from fantasy toward what's real. These moments also calm the nervous system. The body doesn't know the difference between a real threat and an imagined one. So anxious thinking creates a physical response: tight muscles, racing heart, shallow breath. But when attention returns to something immediate, the body gets new information. There is no danger here. The breath deepens, the shoulders lower, the system recalibrates, and all of it begins with one small moment of attention. You can also use the breath itself as a bell. Not breath control, just breath awareness. The inhale that was already happening. The exhale you don't have to create. Every breath is a reminder that life is unfolding right now. You don't need to chase it. You just need to notice it. Sometimes it helps to name the return. Here. This. Now. A single word can act as a signal, a gentle light switch that turns on presence, not because the thought has gone away, but because the mind has stopped feeding it. Over time, awareness anchors change your relationship with thought. You stop seeing thoughts as facts. You stop assuming they require action. They become weather, passing through. They become music in another room. You hear it, but you don't go in. You can also use the body as an anchor. The feeling of your spine, the contact between your feet and the ground, the temperature on your skin, the subtle pulse in your hands. These sensations are always there, but anxiety pulls attention away from them. Returning to them brings you back into the present, which is where anxiety cannot survive. This practice doesn't make you passive. It doesn't stop you from thinking or doing. It makes your actions cleaner, quieter, more intentional, because now you're responding from presence, not from panic. Now you're acting from clarity, not from habit. Even ordinary moments become sacred. Washing your hands, sipping water, hearing a breeze. These become bells, not because they're profound, but because you are finally present enough to feel them. And each time you do, the mind learns. We don't need to chase the storm. We can stay here. This is also a form of compassion. Anxiety often feels like abandonment of the self, of safety, of stability. Returning is an act of care. It says to your inner world, I'm not leaving you alone in this spiral. I'm here. That presence is healing. That presence is enough. And even when thoughts return, even when worry picks up again, you're not starting over. You're practicing. Every return is progress. Every breath is a reminder. You don't need to control the storm. You just need to stop being swept away by it. So, let the next breath come. Let it land fully. Let your attention follow it down into the body. Feel the weight of where you sit or lie. Feel the texture of now. Let this be your bell, the one that says, we are no longer lost, we are home. Once the bell of returning brings the mind back to the breath, to the body, to the texture of now, there's a kind of freshness that appears. The air feels different. Thoughts lose their urgency. But even in that clarity, one thing often keeps the mind spinning: speech. Words, whether spoken aloud or rehearsed silently, tend to reignite the cycle. They pull the body out of stillness. They shape new stories. They restart the commentary. And without realizing it, even a simple sentence can spiral the mind right back into anxious thinking. This is why Buddhism teaches the practice of noble silence, not just to be quiet, but to detox the inner chatter that drives suffering. Because when the mouth stops moving, the mind begins to slow, and that slowing changes everything. Silence is more than the absence of sound. It is the absence of compulsion. Most people don't realize how much energy is spent in speaking, explaining, justifying, reacting, filling empty space. It seems harmless, but every word is a thread, and enough threads woven quickly can become a web, a trap, something too dense for the mind to breathe in. Speech can be honest, useful, beautiful, but when it's constant, it becomes a mirror of internal chaos. That's why noble silence is not about suppression. It's about alignment. Speech that matches clarity, not reactivity. When silence is practiced intentionally, it reveals just how noisy the mind has become. In the absence of speaking, the thoughts that would have been turned into sentences now swirl with nowhere to go. You see them, you hear them, you finally notice the weight they carry, and it's not comfortable at first, because the silence doesn't hide the noise, it exposes it. But that exposure is where healing begins, because only when something is seen can it be released. Anxious people often talk to regulate their discomfort. The voice fills space that feels unsafe. It gives form to uncertainty. But this habit turns language into a defense mechanism. And while it might offer short-term relief, it deepens the long-term spiral, because now discomfort becomes something that must always be spoken away. And in that reflex, silence becomes threatening. But what if silence wasn't empty? What if silence was the medicine? In Buddhist monastic settings, silence is a common practice, sometimes for hours, sometimes for days. The rule is not harsh, it's freeing. No need to respond, no need to explain, just presence, just action without narration. In that space, the mind starts to quiet. Thoughts still rise, but they don't get turned into sound. And when words are not spoken, they lose part of their grip. The story becomes lighter. The mind gets rest. You don't need to live in a monastery to practice this. You can begin with 1 hour a day, a period where nothing needs to be said, not to others, not to yourself. Just a window of stillness. During this time, don't explain your actions in your head. Don't narrate your feelings. Don't rehearse conversations. Let the silence do the speaking. Let it say, "This moment doesn't need commentary, it just needs presence." Over time, this shifts your relationship to language. Words become fewer, sharper, more meaningful. The inner monologue quiets. The reflex to fill silence fades. And in that fading, anxiety has less fuel, because most anxious spirals are fed by inner speech, silent arguments, imaginary scenarios, emotional explanations. But without words, those loops can't form in the same way. They lose structure, they dissolve. This also affects relationships. When you speak less, you listen more. You hear what's underneath the words of others. You become less reactive, more grounded. And when you do speak, your words carry weight. They come from intention, not habit. They are heard differently because they rise from silence, not from noise. The practice also builds resilience. In silence, you learn to sit with discomfort, to not need to verbalize pain or escape through explanation. And that sitting becomes strength. You realize that emotions can be witnessed without being expressed, that tension can be felt without being narrated. And in that space, you stop feeding the mind's need to make meaning out of everything. This doesn't mean silence is always better. It means silence should be part of the rhythm, a reset, a pause, a clearing. Without it, words become clutter. With it, words become sacred. When you speak after silence, you do so with awareness. You ask, is this useful? Is this kind? Is this necessary? And those questions purify language. They turn speech into practice. Even in solitude, noble silence changes how you treat yourself. You stop judging out loud in your mind. You stop rehearsing identity. You stop narrating your worth. And that lack of narration becomes liberation. You no longer need to be anyone in your head. You no longer need to prove anything through internal dialogue. You just are. And that being is enough. One simple practice is to go through daily tasks without thinking in words. Wash the dishes, fold clothes, walk slowly. But don't describe it to yourself. Just feel it. Just move. Just breathe. Let the moment be silent. Let it speak without language, and notice what shifts. Notice how much softer the world becomes when the mind stops trying to name it all. Another practice is writing down every thought you feel the urge to say, not as a performance, but as release. When you read them later, you'll notice how much of it wasn't needed, how much of it was just habit. And with that awareness, the next time those thoughts rise, you'll feel less pressure to give them voice. You'll know they're just passing weather. Noble silence is not isolation. It's not avoidance. It's intimacy. It's a deeper closeness with what is. Because when the mind stops talking, the world speaks louder. The wind, the breath, the stillness, all of it becomes louder than the fear ever was. And that's the paradox. The less you say, the more you hear. The less you narrate, the more you feel. The less you explain, the more you understand. This is not about being silent forever. It's about knowing silence deeply enough to choose when to speak. Knowing presence fully enough to return when words become too much. And knowing peace intimately enough to stop searching for it in sentences. Let the next breath come quietly. Let the space around you widen. Let this silence be alive. Let it hold you. There is nothing to fix, nothing to say. This moment does not need your commentary. It only needs your presence. When the voice within falls quiet, and silence is no longer something to fear, what rises in the stillness isn't always peace. Sometimes it's an old visitor, an ache in the chest, a wave in the stomach, a tightening behind the eyes. Anxiety doesn't always shout. Sometimes it shows up like an unwelcome knock on the door, just when you thought everything had settled. And the first reflex is usually the same. Resist it, suppress it, fix it, run. But there's another way. One that doesn't fight the feeling, but receives it. One that doesn't ask, how do I get rid of this? But instead whispers, what if I could let this be here too? This way is taught through ancient Buddhist and Sufi wisdom, and it changes the entire relationship with discomfort. It teaches that the mind is not a battlefield, it's a guest house. In the poem by Rumi, The idea is simple but powerful. Every emotion is a visitor. Joy, sorrow, fear, jealousy, they come, they stay, and they go. None of them are permanent. None of them own the house. They just pass through. And when this understanding settles into the nervous system, anxiety loses its sharpness. Not because it's gone, but because it's no longer mistaken for a threat. It's just another guest. Most people treat anxiety as something wrong, as something that shouldn't be happening. But what if it's just a message? What if it's the mind's way of telling you that something needs attention, not solving, not fixing, just witnessing? When anxiety is greeted rather than battled, it softens. Because the fight is what makes it grow. The rejection is what gives it energy. Without that resistance, it has nothing to push against. Hosting doesn't mean indulging. It means presence. It means meeting the feeling at the door and saying, "I see you. You can stay as long as you need. I won't push you away, and I won't build my life around you." This balance is delicate but powerful. It allows the emotion to move without letting it drive. Buddhism calls this equanimity, the ability to hold all experiences with evenness of heart. Not flatness, not apathy, but an open-armed steadiness. When equanimity grows, the mind becomes more spacious. Thoughts and emotions can come and go like weather through a wide sky. Anxiety might still arrive, but it doesn't get stuck. It doesn't take over the whole sky. It's allowed, but not obeyed. This practice begins with awareness, noticing when anxiety is present without immediately reacting to it, feeling it in the body, naming it softly. This is anxiety. That simple naming creates a pause, a space between the feeling and the identification. And in that space, you're free. Free to observe, free to breathe, free to choose how to respond or whether to respond at all. The mind is used to attaching identity to emotion. I am anxious. I am overwhelmed. But you are not the guest. You are the space that hosts it. You are the house, not the emotion passing through. That shift in identity from guest to host is what ends the cycle of panic. Because now the emotion doesn't define you, it just visits, it just stays for a while, and eventually it leaves. Hospitality doesn't mean liking the guest, it means treating it with dignity. You don't need to enjoy the presence of anxiety to welcome it. You just need to stop pushing it out the back door. You just need to let it sit, breathe, move. You just need to give it space to exhaust itself naturally. Because emotions that are allowed to complete themselves will eventually fade. It's the grasping that keeps them alive. This can be practiced in daily life. When anxiety rises, during a conversation, in a crowded room, lying awake at night, pause. Feel where it lives in the body. Soften around that place. Imagine it as a visitor who arrived with a story. You don't need to believe the story. You just listen. You acknowledge its presence. And then you let it rest. Sometimes the guest will speak. It might bring old fears, memories, regrets. But you are not the voice. You are not the past it echoes. You are the one watching, the one holding space. And when that role is remembered, the fear doesn't have power anymore, because you're no longer arguing with it. You're no longer giving it your voice. This practice also builds compassion, because the more you can host your own discomfort, the more you can host others. You stop reacting to other people's anxiety. You stop needing to fix everything. You simply sit with them. You listen. You let their emotions come and go, just like yours. And this presence becomes healing, not because it solves, but because it stays. Rumi wrote, "Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond." Even anxiety, even grief, even rage. These are not signs of failure. They are visitors with something to show you, not in words, but in presence. They reveal where the house is closed, where light hasn't reached. And when you open the door, you open yourself to something deeper than comfort. You open to wisdom. Letting anxiety visit doesn't mean becoming passive. It means no longer confusing the emotion with reality. It means allowing feelings to flow through without assigning them the final word. Anxiety might say, "This is dangerous," and you can say, "Thank you, but I'll decide what's true." You're not silencing the voice, you're disidentifying from it. Over time, this changes your entire emotional landscape. Feelings stop becoming emergencies. They become information. And because you no longer fear them, they don't control you. This doesn't make life painless. It makes it livable. It makes it honest. And that honesty brings peace. Not the peace of avoidance, but the peace of being fully present with whatever comes. You don't need to believe every emotion. You just need to feel it. You don't need to control every thought. You just need to watch it. You don't need to fix every discomfort. You just need to host it long enough for it to move on its own. So let the next breath open the door. Let it be the space through which the next emotion enters. You don't have to prepare. You don't have to judge. Just stand at the entrance and meet whatever comes. Not with fear, not with force, but with the calm of someone who knows that no visitor stays forever. Once the mind learns to host anxiety without clinging, something unexpected becomes clear. The guest never came alone. It brought bags, heavy, layered, sometimes invisible. Stories stacked on stories, judgments built on guesses, conclusions made before facts. And suddenly, the weight in the chest, the racing thoughts, the tightening in the belly, it all begins to feel less like a raw experience and more like a structure, something built, something crafted, not consciously, not maliciously, but habitually. This is what Buddhist philosophy calls fabrication, or sankhara, the process of layering thoughts, assumptions, and interpretations over raw experience until the original moment is buried beneath mental construction. It's how panic forms out of thin air, and once this process is seen clearly, the mind begins to let go, not just of anxiety, but of the architecture that holds it up. Fabrication begins in innocence. A thought appears. A simple one. Maybe it's a sound, a memory, or a question. At first, it's just a flicker, but the mind doesn't let it stay small. It adds to it. What does this mean? What will happen next? Why now? What does this say about me? Each thought spawns another. Each one piles onto the last. And soon, the mind isn't feeling a moment. It's drowning in the idea of it. The original spark is gone. What's left is the fire built from it. This layering happens fast. A sensation is felt in the chest. The mind names it, anxiety. Then it judges it. This is bad. Then it projects. This could get worse. Then it personalizes. I shouldn't feel this way. Then it predicts. Something terrible is about to happen. None of these thoughts are the truth. They're interpretations, assumptions, constructions, but the body reacts to them as if they were real. The muscles tighten, the breath shortens, the loop begins. The tragedy of fabrication is that it convinces you that the fear is coming from outside. But the storm is being built internally, one brick at a time. And the most powerful part of the teaching is this: what is built can be unbuilt. What is layered can be peeled away. The panic is not a permanent part of you. It is a structure resting on assumptions, and those assumptions can be questioned. The first step is recognizing the difference between sensation and story. A feeling is just that, a sensation in the body. Warmth, tightness, fluttering. It's real, but it's not dangerous. It's not a problem to solve. It's just something to feel. The moment the mind adds a story, this means something is wrong, this has to be stopped, it's no longer pure. It's been covered, and that covering becomes the anxiety. To unmask fabrication, the mind must slow down. Not stop, just slow. Like watching a replay in slow motion. You feel the tightness, and before the thoughts can rush in, you pause. You ask, what did I just add? Did I name this? Did I resist it? Did I assume something about it? And with each answer, a layer peels back. Sometimes the fabrication is subtle. You don't even realize you're doing it. You think you're just being careful, just planning, just understanding. But what you're really doing is building, shaping a reality in your head that has nothing to do with what's actually happening. And that's why it feels so heavy. You're not carrying a moment. You're carrying a mental sculpture of the moment, and it weighs far more. This is where meditation becomes not just useful, but necessary, because only in stillness can these layers be seen clearly. When you sit and do nothing, the constructions start to rise. Thoughts build themselves, emotions swirl. But you're watching now. You're not climbing inside the structure. You're outside, seeing how it forms, and that witnessing is what breaks the spell. The goal isn't to stop building, it's to stop mistaking the building for truth. You'll always have thoughts. That's not the issue. The issue is believing them without question, letting them define the moment, letting them decide what is real. When you stop doing that, the whole thing begins to crumble. There's a teaching in Buddhism that says all suffering is born from attachment to what is fabricated, not from what is, but from what the mind adds. That's why so much relief comes not from changing your life, but from seeing clearly, from realizing that most of what feels unbearable isn't what's happening, it's what's being layered on top. This also creates compassion. When you realize how much of your own fear is self-constructed, you stop blaming others for theirs. You understand that everyone is carrying a mind full of stories, and you begin to meet those stories with gentleness, not judgment. In daily life, this shows up in the small moments. A comment from someone, a silence in a room, a strange feeling in the body. The mind leaps to explain it, to label it. But what if you didn't? What if you just let it be raw, let it pass through without naming it? That's the undoing, not inaction, but non-construction. Fabrication can also come from memory. The mind pulls something from the past and replays it, not as it happened, but as it's imagined now. And then it builds a future from that memory, a future that doesn't exist, based on a past that's been edited. It feels real, but it's a movie, and you can step out of the screen. One method to unmask fabrication is noting. When a thought arises, label it. Planning, remembering, judging, imagining. Don't analyze it, just name it and let it go. This strips the thought of its disguise. It stops being a truth and becomes what it is, a mental event, a passing movement, not something to fix, not something to believe. The body can also reveal when fabrication is happening. Tension is often a sign. When the shoulders rise, when the breath shortens, it's a signal. Something has been added. Return to the body. Return to sensation. Don't follow the thought. Feel the place where it landed, and just breathe into that space, without story, without fixing, just being. Over time, the mind becomes less reactive. The stories still come, but they don't stick. They're seen as stories. And that seeing is freedom. Because now, even when anxiety rises, it's not panic. It's presence. You're with it. You're not building on it. You're not turning it into something bigger. You're just letting it move. Let the next breath be simple. Let it rise without needing to mean anything. Let it fall without needing to fix anything. This breath doesn't need a name. It doesn't need a story. It just is. Like the moment. Like the feeling. Like you. Once the illusion of panic is revealed to be a construction, built layer by layer through mental fabrication, there comes a deeper realization. Some of those layers were never yours to begin with. Some of those fears didn't start in your body. They didn't start with your story. They were given to you, passed down quietly, lived out loud by those who came before. This is the echo of ancestral anxiety, a pattern that repeats itself through generations, not out of destiny, but out of habit. And what Buddhism offers is not just understanding, but freedom, the path of mindful disidentification, the choice to step out of a loop you were born into, but do not have to continue. Karma, as taught in Buddhism, is not fate. It's not a punishment. It's a momentum, a chain of cause and effect driven by action, speech, and thought, and not just your own. Family systems pass down karma like rivers pass down silt. Sometimes the stream is clear, stories told, fears shared, behaviors mimicked. But often it's invisible. A mother who flinches at confrontation, a father who tightens around control, a grandparent who taught silence instead of expression. None of it said directly, yet all of it absorbed. The body learns before the mind can name it. This kind of inheritance doesn't live in genetics alone. It lives in nervous systems, in how emotions were handled or not handled, in how conflict was met or avoided, in what was considered safe to feel. If your caregivers met fear with panic, you learn to do the same. If they met uncertainty with anger or shutdown, those patterns became familiar. Not because you chose them, but because you were surrounded by them. And this is where karma becomes active. Because once you see the pattern, you are no longer just a participant. You are the pivot point. The one who can choose differently, the one who can stop the echo. This doesn't mean blaming the past. It means understanding it without being trapped by it. The goal is not to erase what came before, but to stop it from continuing through you. To do this, the first step is recognition. The ability to name what you've inherited, not as identity, but as influence. You start to see the places in your life where fear feels automatic, but out of proportion, where reactions happen before thought, where you brace for conflict even when none exists. These are the fingerprints of old karma. They are not proof of brokenness, they are invitations to heal. Mindfulness gives you the space to observe these patterns without being overwhelmed by them. Instead of saying, "This is just who I am," you begin to say, "This is what I learned." That shift is everything, because what is learned can be unlearned. What was absorbed can be released, not by force, but through presence. One way to practice this is to watch your reactions like you would watch a performance. When something triggers anxiety, pause, feel the body, listen to the thoughts, but don't rush to fix them. Just ask, whose voice is this? Where did I first learn to feel this way? Who modeled this reaction for me? Sometimes the answer is clear. Sometimes it's just a sense. Either way, you begin to create space between the pattern and your identity. This space is where karma dissolves, because karma continues through identification, through believing every thought, through reacting the same way. But when you step back, when you witness instead of follow, the pattern can't feed itself anymore. It begins to unravel. Another practice is self-forgiveness, because inherited anxiety often comes with shame. The shame of not being calm enough, of not being stable enough. But that shame is also inherited. You didn't choose this, you didn't invent it. You simply lived in an environment that taught your body to survive this way. Forgiveness doesn't make the past disappear. It makes space for something new to grow. Ritual can also help, not in a mystical sense, but in a symbolic one. Writing a letter to the fear you inherited, naming it, thanking it for helping you survive, and then letting it go. Burning the letter, burying it, putting it in water, not to forget it, but to mark the moment of transition, the moment when you choose not to carry it forward. Sometimes this process brings grief. Grief for the years lost to anxiety that wasn't even yours. Grief for the way fear shaped your childhood. Grief for the love that couldn't be fully felt. Let that grief move through. It's not weakness, it's the weight lifting. It's the body clearing out what it never needed to hold. You may also begin to see how your own choices have already started to change the pattern. Every moment of pause, every breath taken in awareness, every time you didn't snap or shut down or run. These moments matter. They are you rewriting the story. They are you becoming the ancestor who did it differently. This process doesn't have an end point. There's no final purge. Karma is subtle. It returns in new forms. But with each return, your relationship to it changes. You meet it with more wisdom, more compassion, less fear. You stop being the container and you become the channel, letting the old flow through you, but not stopping with you. This kind of healing is not just personal, it's collective. Because the calmer you become, the more space others feel around you. Your nervous system begins to regulate others. Your silence becomes safety. Your presence becomes permission for others to feel. This is how ancestral anxiety ends, not through resistance, but through quiet revolution. One breath, one pause, one act of non-reaction at a time. Let the next breath come with this awareness. You are not broken. You are not bound. You are standing in the middle of a lineage, holding both the pain and the power to transform it. Not for validation, not for perfection, but because peace is possible, because you've seen what fear does, and you're ready for something different. After seeing how inherited anxiety can be softened through presence and mindful disidentification, something deeper starts to stir beneath the surface. Even with the past understood and forgiven, a quiet tension remains, not from what already happened, but from what might, from the future, from the constant anticipation of a world that hasn't arrived. The mind, still clinging to its old habits, keeps reaching forward. It tries to fix problems that don't exist yet. It imagines worst-case scenarios and builds tension around them as if they were already real. This is the hidden layer of suffering that often goes unnoticed. The anxiety of what hasn't happened, and the path forward isn't about more control. It's about a strange but liberating act: forgiving the future. This sounds strange at first. How do you forgive something that hasn't occurred? But when you look closer, the logic begins to dissolve and something wiser steps in. Because the future already takes up space in your body. It lives in your shoulders, your breath, your racing heart. It presses into the present through thought and worry and unfinished scenarios. The mind thinks it's preparing, but what it's really doing is punishing itself for something that hasn't happened. It holds itself hostage, rehearsing fear. And in Buddhist teaching, this is exactly where the root of suffering lies, not in pain itself, but in the fear of pain, not in the event, but in the preemptive resistance. To forgive the future means to stop holding it responsible for your current tension. It means releasing the tight grip on outcomes, results, performances, and possibilities. The mind clings to the idea that if it just plans well enough, nothing bad will happen. But that planning in excess becomes torment. It builds a story of danger where there is only space. Forgiveness, in this sense, is not a moral action. It's a healing one. It's saying, I release you, future, from the burden of needing to go perfectly. I release you from the need to protect me from every discomfort. I release you from the weight of my peace. The present becomes heavy when the future is feared. Every moment gets filtered through a question mark. Will this lead to something bad? Am I doing enough now to prevent pain later? This tightrope of anticipation drains energy and often leads to nothing useful. The truth is, most of the things we worry about never arrive. And when they do, they often look different than expected. But the cost of that constant worry is real. It erodes peace. It distracts from beauty. It turns rest into restlessness. Forgiving the future brings you back. It pulls the mind out of tomorrow and into the body that's breathing right now. It says, this is enough. Not because the future is safe, but because safety was never the requirement. Presence was, surrender was, and forgiveness becomes the doorway. One of the deepest teachings in Buddhism is that suffering arises from craving and aversion, wanting things to go a certain way, or desperately trying to prevent what we don't want. The future becomes the canvas on which these cravings are projected, and every projection, every imagined disaster, is another thread tying your energy to a time that doesn't exist. This is why letting go of the future doesn't mean being irresponsible. It means being free. You still plan, you still show up, but you stop believing that your happiness depends on everything unfolding exactly the way you expect. Forgiving the future also means forgiving yourself for not being able to know, for not being able to control, for being human in a world of change. The pressure to predict, to perform, to prevent, these are inherited burdens, cultural, personal, ancestral, but they don't have to define the way forward. You can say, I let myself off the hook. I'm not here to perfect the future. I'm here to be fully awake right now. One practice for this is called intentional surrender. Each morning, before doing anything else, say to yourself, I forgive whatever today brings. You're not inviting chaos. You're acknowledging reality, that plans will shift, that emotions will rise, that people will be people. This doesn't mean giving up. It means giving up the illusion that you are in charge of all of it. This small ritual begins to teach the nervous system that it can relax, that it doesn't have to prepare for every impact, that it can meet life as it unfolds. You can also practice this in moments of rising anxiety. When the thought loop starts, what if this happens? What if that doesn't work? Pause. Feel the breath. Feel the body. And say gently, I forgive what hasn't happened. This cuts the loop. It removes the pressure. It allows the present to come back into focus. What makes this practice powerful is that it doesn't try to outthink the fear. It doesn't argue with it. It doesn't give the mind another task. It speaks to a deeper place. The part of you that knows most fear is a rehearsal. Most suffering is anticipation. And most of what we fear cannot be controlled, only met, only felt, only released. Forgiveness, in this way, is not weakness, it's strength. It takes courage to loosen your grip. It takes maturity to say, even if things don't go as I hope, I will still be here. I will still breathe. I will still find peace in this body. This is the heart of resilience, not immunity to pain, but the willingness to keep opening no matter what comes. This approach also transforms how we relate to others. Much of our anxiety is tied to how we think people will act or respond or judge us in the future. But we can't control their minds. We can't predict their choices. And trying to do so only makes us tense and defensive. Forgiving the future means releasing others from the job of keeping us calm. It means saying, I don't need you to act a certain way for me to be okay. That freedom is rare and powerful. The future also becomes softer when we stop seeing it as a test, as a moment where we'll be judged or exposed or punished. That belief comes from old conditioning, from systems that taught us we had to earn love, earn safety, earn rest. But the Dharma, the truth taught in Buddhism, says otherwise. It says that peace is your natural state, not something achieved through perfection, but revealed through letting go. Letting go of the future also makes room for joy, because when the mind is always scanning for danger, it misses what's beautiful. It sees through a narrow lens, but when that lens is put down, the world widens. You start to notice small things again, the warmth of sunlight, the way wind moves through leaves, the way your breath feels in your chest. These aren't distractions, they are reminders. Reminders that life isn't waiting for you in some future moment. It's right here. So let the next breath be one of soft release. Let it be a pause in the chase. Let it say to the future, You don't owe me anything. Let it say to this moment, you are enough, because you are. And peace doesn't live in prediction. It lives in presence. After releasing the grip on what hasn't happened, after forgiving the tension of imagined futures, the body begins to soften into something new. There's less reaching, less planning, less resistance. But what fills that space now is not just emptiness, it's vibration, a presence deeper than thought. Not another story, not another effort, but a rhythm, a sound, or the space between sounds. The nervous system, long held hostage by urgency and fear, now listens differently. Not for instructions, not for warnings, but for rest. And this is where the sound of stillness becomes essential. In Buddhist practice, sound isn't just noise, it's medicine. Whether it's the ring of a bell, the hum of a chant, or the sheer clarity of silence itself, each one can recalibrate the entire system, not by force, but by resonance. The nervous system is always listening. Even when the mind is distracted, the body hears everything. It tunes to rhythm, to tone, to texture. A loud space makes the body brace. A sudden noise makes the heart jump. And in the same way, a soft sound, a sacred sound, makes the body soften. This isn't mystical, it's biological. The auditory system is deeply tied to the vagus nerve, the regulator of calm and safety. When the ears receive consistent, gentle input, the vagus nerve sends signals to the body. It's safe to relax. This is how monks can sit still for hours. This is why temples ring bells, why chants are repeated, not for superstition, but for healing. Sound is also a way to anchor attention. When thoughts are chaotic, the breath might feel too subtle to hold. But sound cuts through. A bell, a chant, a tone. Each one becomes a thread the mind can follow back to presence. It's simple. It's physical. It doesn't require belief. It just requires listening. Chanting is one of the oldest practices for this. The repetition of syllables like Om or Namo or Amitabha is not just about meaning, it's about frequency. The vibration moves through the chest, the throat, the skull. It organizes internal rhythms, slows the breath, regulates the heartbeat, and more than anything, it overrides mental noise. You can't chant and worry at the same time. The sound takes over. The vibration becomes the focus, and slowly the spiral dissolves. Even simple humming can be powerful. It engages the vocal cords and resonates through the chest. It activates calm without needing words, just a low, steady tone. It becomes a lullaby for the nervous system. A way of saying, you can rest now. You are here. There is nothing to fix. Bells are another sacred tool. In monasteries, they are used not just to signal time, but to mark return. Every time the bell rings, the mind is invited home, not with urgency, but with clarity. The sound cuts through thought. It stops the drift. It reminds the practitioner, this moment is enough. Some bells are high and bright, others deep and long. The sound isn't the point. It's what the sound does. It opens space. Silence, too, is a kind of sound. Not the absence of noise, but the presence of stillness. The kind of quiet that hums, that wraps around the body like a soft blanket. Many people are afraid of silence because it makes inner noise louder. But that's the medicine. In silence, what's hidden rises, and when it rises, it can be met, not solved, just heard. This is why periods of silence are built into Buddhist retreats. Not to create discipline, but to create space. Space where the nervous system can find its rhythm again. Space where the mind no longer needs to chase. The silence doesn't demand anything, it just holds. And in that holding, the body resets. You don't need a temple to experience this. You can create sonic stillness in daily life. A few minutes of humming before sleep. A bell chime on your phone that rings once an hour just to bring you back. A playlist of soft chants or nature sounds while you breathe. Or even just sitting quietly and noticing the sounds around you. Cars in the distance, birds, wind, your own breath. Not to judge them, just to listen. Listening is an underrated form of meditation. When you stop trying to control the environment and just receive it, something shifts. The world becomes more textured. The mind becomes more grounded. The sound becomes a teacher, a mirror, a home. Sound can also be used as a transition, from thought into presence, from stress into rest, from day into night. Lighting a candle and ringing a bell at the end of the day is not ritual, it's recalibration. A way to signal the nervous system, the work is done. You can return now. This is especially helpful for sleep. Many people carry anxiety into the night. Thoughts repeat. The body won't settle. But the use of steady, soft sound, like Tibetan singing bowls, low chants, or white noise, can guide the system down. Not through suppression, but through resonance, through tuning the inner world to something slower, deeper, kinder. Sound also helps release stuck energy. Emotions that couldn't be spoken often stay lodged in the body. Vocal practices like toning, humming, or even singing can help move them, not through performance, but through vibration. The body doesn't need you to explain the pain, it needs you to vibrate it out, to give it rhythm, to let it move. This is why group chanting is so powerful. In a room full of people humming the same sound, the individual dissolves into something shared. The boundary between self and other fades. The vibration fills the space. And the nervous system, so often isolated, remembers connection. This is not performance. This is presence in unison. You can also find stillness in natural sound. The rustle of leaves, the crackle of a fire, the waves on the shore. These sounds require no effort. They ask nothing of you. They exist without your control. And in listening, you begin to match them. You begin to slow. You begin to breathe with the world. The power of sonic stillness isn't in its volume. It's in its truth. It doesn't argue with thought. It doesn't compete. It just invites. And when the invitation is accepted, the mind becomes quiet, not forced, but soothed. The nervous system doesn't need orders. It needs rhythm. It needs space. It needs kindness in frequency form. Let the next sound you hear be enough. Don't analyze it. Don't name it. Just let it land. Let it carry you back. Let it echo through the body like a reminder. This is now. This is safe. This is home. Once the nervous system has been touched by stillness, through sound, silence, rhythm, there comes a moment where the next step isn't doing more, it's doing less, or rather, stopping completely. Because even the softest practices, the kindest techniques, the most peaceful chants can quietly become part of the same old pattern. The chase, the subtle pressure to feel better, the invisible urge to fix something, even the intention to relax can carry the flavor of striving. And here lies the most paradoxical and transformative part of the journey, the discovery that peace is not found by seeking it. It's found by stopping the search altogether, the non-practice, the radical decision to no longer pursue peace, but to rest in what is already here. This might sound strange, especially after so many steps of mindful practice, breathwork, observation, sound, and silence. But there comes a threshold where technique becomes tension, where the effort to be calm becomes the reason calm stays just out of reach. This doesn't mean the practices were wrong, it means they've done their job, they've led you to the edge. And now the edge invites you to drop even the method, to stop polishing the mirror and simply see what's in it. The truth is, the desire to feel better can quietly turn into a form of self-rejection. The moment we say, "I need to relax," we imply something's wrong. The moment we reach for peace, we confirm its absence. And in that subtle confirmation, we build more distance, more effort, more anxiety. This is what Buddhist teachers mean when they say the path must be dropped, not discarded, but released, like letting go of a boat once you've crossed the river. You needed it. But now it's time to walk. Non-practice doesn't mean apathy. It doesn't mean spacing out. It's not numbness or laziness or avoidance. It's a different kind of presence. One that doesn't organize itself around any goal. One that doesn't try to fix, change, improve, achieve. It simply allows. It watches without managing. It feels without analyzing. It lets the moment be without needing it to be anything else. And in that openness, true stillness begins. This kind of presence can't be forced. You can't try to not try. You can only notice when effort arises and gently let it fall. You can watch the tension in the breath, the gripping in the jaw, the measuring mind, checking if the meditation is working, and then loosen the grip. Each time you do, you move closer to natural being. In this space, even the observer dissolves, not in a dramatic way, but like fog burning off in sunlight. There's no longer a need to witness every thought, no longer a need to track awareness. You are simply here, like the sky, not needing to comment on every cloud that passes, just resting in its own openness. This doesn't happen because you figured something out. It happens because the system finally trusts that it doesn't need to do anything. The habit of striving unwinds, the inner push softens, and what's left is something ancient, something simple, something completely untouched by anxiety. Presence without agenda. It helps to think of non-practice as allowing gravity to do its job. You don't have to hold yourself up. You don't have to manage your inner world. You can settle. You can fall inward. You can let your awareness land without steering it. Just as the breath breathes itself, presence lives itself. It doesn't need to be directed. It just is. Sometimes people fear that if they stop trying, they'll collapse. That if they stop striving, nothing will happen. But this fear comes from a mind that's been trained to chase. In truth, when effort stops, clarity begins. Not in the way the mind imagines, but in a more subtle, more honest way. There's nothing to prove, nothing to solve. You're not meditating anymore. You're not practicing. You're just being. And that being is enough. This kind of stillness can't be measured. You can't evaluate it. You can't describe it accurately. It's not calm like a frozen lake. It's calm like open space. Everything moves through it, but it doesn't move with anything. It holds the whole show without being caught in any scene. Letting go of practice doesn't mean forgetting what you've learned. It means trusting that what you've learned has become part of you. The breath awareness, the observation, the compassion, none of that disappears. It just stops being effortful. It stops being something you do. It becomes what you are. This non-practice can happen anywhere. Sitting, walking, standing in line. You don't need a special space or special time. You just stop reaching. You stop shaping the moment. You stop adjusting the self. And what remains is presence in its rawest form. Unfiltered, unmanaged, alive. This state is sometimes called just sitting in Zen. Shikantaza. Not sitting to meditate, not sitting to improve, just sitting, letting everything be as it is. No special breathing, no technique. Just the act of not trying to become anything. It's deceptively simple and deeply transformative. Even in difficult emotions, this approach changes everything. When sadness rises, you don't fix it. When fear appears, you don't manage it. You let them come, you let them go, like waves. Not because you're passive, but because you're finally not resisting. You're finally not tightening around what life is doing. And in that softness, suffering dissolves on its own. This is the heart of the Buddha's teaching. Suffering ends when craving ends. Craving for relief, craving for control, craving for a different now. The moment that craving stops, peace is not achieved. It's revealed, because it was always there, underneath the struggle. Let the next breath arrive on its own. Don't hold it. Don't shape it. Don't even watch it. Let it be. Let your awareness rest the same way. Unmanaged, open, unconcerned. This is non-practice. This is the stillness that lives beneath effort. The calm that doesn't need your help. And from this stillness, something surprising starts to happen. Energy returns, not the frantic kind, but a quiet, steady vitality. Because when you stop chasing peace, you stop exhausting yourself, you stop running in circles, and the body, the mind, the heart, all begin to refill. This is how rest becomes power, how surrender becomes strength. When the chase for peace finally stops, and the body surrenders into simple being, what often rises next isn't clarity, it's heaviness. A soft fog, a weight behind the eyes, a kind of mental blur that doesn't feel quite awake and doesn't feel quite asleep. Most people resist this state. They see it as laziness, dullness, or something to shake off. But what if that fog is actually sacred? What if the state of mild disorientation before sleep, the moment when thoughts loosen their grip, when willpower fades, when the edges of the world begin to blur, is not a distraction, but a doorway? This is what Buddhist insight quietly reveals. That lethargy, when not feared or judged, becomes a gate into the deepest forms of letting go. The sleepy, restless space between wakefulness and sleep is one of the most fertile terrains for healing. It's a moment when the ego lets down its walls, when identity begins to dissolve, when the part of the mind that manages everything, the planner, the protector, the judge, goes quiet. And in that gap, something more ancient takes over, something wise, slow, and beyond effort. But only if the mind doesn't resist it. Only if you don't jerk back into alertness, trying to stay productive or mindful. Because the truth is, some of the deepest awareness isn't sharp, it's soft. It arrives not when the mind is bright, but when the mind is quiet enough to stop interfering. In many spiritual traditions, the space just before sleep is revered. Tibetan Buddhists call it a liminal threshold, a time when the barriers between conscious and unconscious begin to fade, when clinging to self loosens. In this state, meditation deepens not through focus, but through surrender. You're not guiding awareness anymore. You're floating in it, letting it carry you instead of directing it. There's no need to think clearly, no need to practice correctly. The very fog you were taught to avoid becomes the warm mist where the mind finally rests. This transition state, often mistaken for a problem, is a signal that the body is ready to heal. It's the body saying, enough thinking, enough controlling, enough fixing, just dissolve. Let your shape melt. Let the border between inside and outside soften. In this state, thoughts don't stop, but they lose their importance. Emotions still exist, but they drift instead of crash. It's a soft, gentle undoing. When approached with openness, this fog becomes a kind of sanctuary, a place to rest, not just physically, but spiritually. There's no performance here, no inner commentary, just presence that doesn't require clarity. It may feel like you're doing nothing. And that's exactly the point. True meditation isn't measured by alertness. It's measured by intimacy, by how close you are to what's happening. And when what's happening is drowsiness, then intimacy means letting yourself sink into it, not to escape, but to arrive more fully in the body. One of the reasons people fear lethargy is because they associate it with failure, with being lazy or unfocused. But these ideas are cultural, not spiritual. In Buddhist teachings, drowsiness isn't a sin, it's a state, and like all states, it can be met with mindfulness, not sharp mindfulness, gentle mindfulness, the kind that says, I see this, I welcome this, I don't need to change this. There is a particular kind of awareness that only opens in this space, a dreaming awareness, a presence that feels more like a background hum than a bright light. This awareness is closer to the root of consciousness. It doesn't analyze, it doesn't track progress, it simply rests. And in that rest, anxiety dissolves, not because it's solved, but because the part of the mind that fuels it has gone quiet. Restlessness, too, becomes different in this space. It's no longer a problem to manage. It becomes something to soften into. Often, restlessness is just the body's way of releasing energy, like a dog turning in circles before lying down. If you don't react to it, it will move on its own. If you stop naming it, it will pass. The nervous system doesn't need force. It needs trust. It needs to know that you're not going to interrupt the process with judgment. This is why the moment right before sleep is such an opportunity. Because all the usual tools are fading. The intellect is quiet. The inner critic is asleep. What's left is something much more intimate. Raw awareness without the need to perform. You don't need to name it. You don't need to remember it. Just feel it as it happens. Let your body sink. Let the breath do what it wants. Let your thoughts drift without catching them. You're not trying to sleep. You're not trying to meditate. You're just allowing yourself to dissolve. This state is also deeply regenerative. The body repairs itself here, not just physically, but emotionally. It's the space where stress releases from muscle memory, where trauma unwinds without analysis, where the weight that's been carried all day starts to melt, not because of effort, but because effort has stopped. Even the foggy, half-dream thoughts have their own wisdom. They're not logical, but they're honest. They come from a deeper place. You might feel old emotions rise, old memories, but they pass like clouds. You don't need to chase them or interpret them. Just watch. Let the mist of the moment hold them. This is healing without talking, transformation without tension. Some meditators call this the great unbinding, the final loosening of grasping, not through force, but through surrender. You're not chasing stillness, you're becoming it. And the mind, finally free from the need to manage, floats, not upward, but inward, into the heart, into the belly, into the breath, into a place where time slows, space softens, and thought stops being the main voice. You can prepare for this gently. Lower the lights, turn off the noise, let your body settle without correcting it. If you feel restless, let it twitch. If you feel sleepy, let the eyes close. Don't aim for sleep. Don't aim for wakefulness. Just let awareness drift like a boat without a rudder. The mind will try to reassert control. Let it. Then let it go again, over and over, drifting deeper. And in that drift, something beautiful happens. You realize you were never the one steering. Peace was never far away. It was just buried under effort, under control, under the constant push to get somewhere. But in this fog, in this letting go, there's nowhere to get to. And in that nowhereness, everything opens. So let the next breath rise slowly, like mist from a field at dawn. Let it fall without pulling it. Let your body float. Let your thoughts dissolve. Let your identity blur. There is no one to be. There is nothing to do. This moment is the teacher now, and its only lesson is this: you were always free. After drifting through the sleepy threshold where the body stops trying and the mind unhooks from control, something becomes clearer than ever before. Beneath every moment of striving, beneath every ripple of worry, beneath even the gentlest meditative effort, there has always been a quiet voice, whispering, pressuring, insisting that something must be done now, that time is running out, that peace must be achieved before something breaks. That voice, subtle or loud, is urgency, and it is the biggest lie anxiety ever told. Urgency feels convincing. It speaks with certainty. It says, if you don't solve this right now, something terrible will happen. It hijacks your breath. It narrows your focus. It makes the moment feel too small to hold what you're feeling, and so the body tightens. The heartbeat speeds. Thoughts race. But here's the secret Buddhism reveals again and again. Most urgency isn't real. It's not a reflection of the world. It's a reaction of the mind, a reflex built through years of conditioning, trauma, performance, and fear. The nervous system doesn't know how to tell the difference between a true emergency and a story the mind made up. And anxiety exploits that. It creates fictional deadlines, emotional alarms, imaginary disasters, all to keep the attention hooked, spinning, reacting. And this spinning creates more noise, more exhaustion, more inner chaos. Urgency feeds itself by convincing you that you must solve what isn't even real yet. Urgency isn't just a thought pattern. It's a physical posture. It lives in the jaw, the fists, the muscles around the eyes. It shortens the breath. It narrows the chest. It pushes everything inward and forward at the same time. And that movement tricks the body into thinking it's in danger. But it isn't. There's no fire, no attack, no real deadline, just a mind reacting to its own fear. This is where freedom begins. Not by fighting urgency, but by seeing it clearly, naming it. This is urgency. That small pause, that act of labeling, breaks the spell, because it shifts you from being inside the urgency to being the one witnessing it. And the witness is always calm. Not because nothing is happening, but because the witness sees that most of what's happening is made of thought, not truth. Many people believe they can't rest until everything is finished, until every email is sent, every conflict resolved, every answer known. But that finish line keeps moving. It's a trick. The moment one thing is done, another takes its place. And so peace stays out of reach, not because of life's demands, but because of the mind's refusal to stop running. Buddhist practice trains the mind to recognize this loop, to notice how urgency arises from craving for resolution, for control, for safety, and how that craving creates suffering long before anything real has gone wrong. The mind says, hurry, before it's too late. But late for what? That question alone begins to unravel the panic, because most of the time there is no clear answer, just a vague threat, a shadow. This is especially true with emotional urgency, the feeling that you must say something now, decide something now, fix something now. But emotions don't need urgent responses. They need space. When you pause instead of react, you begin to realize that urgency doesn't carry wisdom, it carries compulsion. And compulsion rarely leads to peace. This is why mindfulness includes not just awareness, but patience, the willingness to not know, to not fix, to not rush. This patience is not passive, it's powerful, because it creates room for clarity. And clarity reveals that what felt like an emergency was just an old habit, repeating itself out of fear. In daily life, this practice looks simple. When you feel the urge to act, speak, decide, pause, breathe, ask, is this truly urgent or just familiar? Notice how the body softens when you question urgency. Notice how the mind widens. Suddenly, what felt like a deadline becomes a choice. What felt like a crisis becomes a moment. The truth is, most things can wait. Not forever, but for one breath, 1 minute, 1 hour. And in that waiting, reality shows itself. You see that the email didn't need to be perfect, that the conversation didn't need to happen immediately, that the feeling didn't need to be solved to be survived. This isn't about avoidance, it's about timing, about meeting the moment when the body is ready, not when the mind demands. And readiness doesn't come from pressure, it comes from presence, from trust, from knowing that wisdom unfolds, not under tension, but under stillness. Even spiritual practice can become infected by urgency, the rush to heal, to awaken, to be better. But the Dharma is not a race. There is nowhere to get to. Enlightenment is not the end of effort. It's the end of trying to escape now. And now is never urgent. It just is. This shift in perception changes everything. Suddenly, you don't need to be on high alert. You don't need to finish everything before you relax. You start relaxing now, in the middle of the task, in the middle of the mess. Because you've seen the lie, you've heard the voice of urgency, and you're not answering the call. When urgency loses its power, anxiety fades, because anxiety is urgency without direction, a need to do something without knowing what. But when you see urgency for what it is, the pressure lifts. Not because life is easy, but because you're no longer sprinting toward peace. You're standing still, and peace meets you there. Let this breath be unrushed. Let your shoulders drop. Let your eyes soften. There is no alarm ringing. No moment that can't wait for your next breath. Even if something needs your attention, it can have it without your panic. Presence is enough. Calm is still effective. Stillness still moves mountains. Once the voice of urgency is exposed for what it is, just noise dressed in panic, just habit pretending to be truth, the silence underneath it finally comes forward. And in that silence, something even more profound begins to appear. The realization that all thoughts, especially anxious ones, don't stay. They don't last. They don't hold. No matter how convincing they feel, no matter how tightly they grip the body, they are already dissolving the moment they arise. They have no substance, no roots, just movement. And what Buddhism teaches through direct experience is this: watching the fade of a thought is more powerful than fighting it, because in that fading, freedom lives. Most people only notice a thought when it's strong, when it crashes in with force, when it interrupts sleep, hijacks the breath, or sets off spirals of fear. But the real teaching begins not in the arrival of thought, but in its departure, because every thought leaves, every worry loses momentum. Even if it loops back again later, the version that existed in that moment is gone. It lived, it moved, it passed. And once this truth is seen, not as an idea, but as a felt truth, the fear that thoughts are permanent begins to vanish. The mind likes to hold on to thoughts as if they're solid. It gives them weight, importance, urgency, especially the scary ones. But thoughts are not rocks, they're smoke. They rise, they swirl, and they vanish into air. No anxious thought has ever lasted forever. No emotional storm has kept its full force for more than a few moments. It is the clinging to the thought, the feeding of it, that gives it artificial life. But if left alone, if observed without interference, the thought fades on its own. The Dharma, the core teaching of impermanence, lives here, not as something to believe, but as something to watch, to witness directly. The breath rises and falls, the heart beats and slows, the sensations in the body shift every second, nothing holds, and thought is no different. It arises from conditions. When those conditions change, the thought changes, and even if it returns, it's never quite the same. You are never quite the same. When this truth begins to settle into your awareness, your relationship to anxiety changes. You no longer need to solve the thought. You don't need to challenge it. You don't need to silence it. You just need to watch it move. Like a wave reaching shore, it will crash, and then it will slide away, and the sand will be quiet again. This is not detachment in a cold or distant way. It's presence without panic. It's the choice to stay with the experience of thought without becoming it. To see the mind doing what minds do, create, spin, wander. But not confuse that movement with reality. Every time a thought arises, you are offered a choice. Not whether the thought comes, but whether you give it fuel, whether you follow it down the path it's carving, whether you turn it into identity. I am anxious. I am unsafe. But when you watch the thought fade, you begin to see the lie. The thought isn't you. It's just passing through you. And when you stop feeding it, it stops forming roots. There is something called bare attention in Buddhist practice. It means observing what is happening without adding anything to it. No judgment, no commentary, no analysis, just watching. When you apply bare attention to anxious thoughts, you see their nature more clearly. They flicker, they hesitate, they try to grow, but they dissolve when you don't react. It's like watching a match burn out before it lights the next one. This dissolving process can be felt in the body too. The tension that rises with a scary thought doesn't stay. The tight chest, the flutter in the stomach, they pulse, then soften. If you don't resist, if you don't label them as wrong, when you allow the body to experience the energy without the mind amplifying it, the body processes it naturally, and then it fades. One of the great illusions of anxiety is that the thought must be answered, that until it's resolved, it will stay. But it won't. Thoughts have a half-life, even the intense ones. They may return, yes, but not because they're permanent, because they've been practiced. And even that habit can dissolve once you stop believing every thought that visits you. There's something deeply peaceful about sitting in the middle of an anxious thought and realizing that it's already fading, that it's not growing, it's passing. That awareness doesn't need to control it. Just hold it, just witness it fall apart on its own. This kind of seeing changes the nervous system. It trains the body to trust that presence is stronger than panic. This also builds patience. You stop needing to rush your way out of discomfort. You stop trying to escape every emotion. You sit, you breathe, you let the thought come, and you let it go like a cloud blown apart by wind. You stop being the storm, and you become the sky it moves through. Over time, something else shifts. You stop fearing the next thought, even if it's intense, even if it's dark, because you've seen the ending, you've seen the fade, and that knowledge makes the next spiral less powerful. You meet it with calm, not because you're perfect, but because you've practiced dissolving. This is also where compassion grows, for yourself and for others, because you see how hard it is to live inside a mind that builds so many stories. You see how exhausting it is to believe every fear, and you start to soften. You start to say to your own mind, I know you're scared, but I'm not leaving, and I know you'll settle soon. Even sleep becomes easier when you hold this truth. Because the mind doesn't need to be empty to rest. It just needs to not be afraid of its own thoughts. The moment you stop chasing silence and start watching thoughts dissolve, the pressure to fix the mind disappears, and with that, rest comes naturally. So let the next thought come. Let it pass. Watch its shape. Feel its echo. But don't follow it. Don't hold it. Just sit. Just breathe. Just be the one who sees. That seeing is the end of the story. Not because the thought won't return, but because you're no longer giving it the stage. The Dharma of dissolving is not a philosophy. It's an experience. A truth revealed not in books, but in breath, in the space between moments, in the softness that grows when you no longer fight what's fading. You just watch, and that watching becomes peace. And now, as all thoughts begin to settle, as the nervous system learns to trust impermanence, we reach the final understanding. The realization that not only are anxious thoughts fading, but that even your attachment to thoughts is dissolving, that the core identity built around struggle is no longer needed. And from that emptiness, something deeper emerges. Not silence, but clarity. Not numbness, but freedom. That's where we end, on the threshold of pure awareness, where everything falls away and only presence remains. You've just journeyed through the quiet unraveling of anxiety, not by fighting it, not by fixing it, but by understanding it, layer by layer. You've seen how certainty isn't safety, how identity isn't fixed, how the observer can rest, how craving builds the panic, and how the body holds what words cannot express. You've released tension stored in breath, met the second arrow of fear with compassion, left clock time behind, and touched the breath before thought ever formed. You've stepped out of constant reaction, unmasked the illusion of control, traced the roots of anxious karma, and forgiven futures that haven't happened. You've learned to hear stillness, stopped chasing peace, let lethargy become a doorway, watched urgency unravel, and finally seen anxiety itself dissolve. And now here you are, still, present, weightless. Not every night will be easy. Not every thought will dissolve immediately. But you now know what most people never see, that you are not your anxiety. You are the space it passes through, and that space is vast, calm, and untouched. If something in this helped you, even just a little, let us know. Drop a comment and share the moment that landed deepest for you. Your voice might be the exact thing someone else needs to hear tonight. And if you'd like to keep walking this path with us, subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss another journey inward. Until next time, rest easy, breathe deeply, and remember, you are already home.